like to call to order this special Cedarburg Board of Education meeting. Today is Wednesday, September 30th, 2020. This is a special meeting of the Cedarburg School Board and is a public meeting. Prior notices have been placed in the district and additional copies were forwarded to the News Graphic and Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. I'd like to do an attendance roll call. Creer.
Present.
Badberg.
Present.
Cox.
Present.
Kennedy.
Here.
Goldbeck.
Here.
And Reimer is here as well. Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. All right. And this meeting is being streamed, is that correct? Okay. All right. Can someone check on that? Just make sure it is streaming. Yeah, let's just see if it's on. We'll just pause for a moment. So the live stream is in the notice that was posted.
How many people are on the stream? Is there a good number or is it empty? Oh.
While you're doing that, we're going to move on.
Yep, no, it's live now.
Okay, good. All right, excellent. All right, next item is the approval of minutes. Minutes of September 16th, 2020.
Kennedy moves approval. Cox, second.
With a motion and a second, all those in favor, roll call. Creer.
Aye.
Padberg.
Aye.
Cox.
Aye.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Goldbeck.
Aye.
Reimers and I passes unanimously. And then we'll move on to recommendations. Mr. Bugnacki.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to those who are attending in person and those watching from the comfort of their homes. For those in person, thank you for wearing a mask and practicing social distancing. We are about to enter our 4th week of school, and with all things considered, I'm pleased with our progress and our response to our reentry plan. There's still plenty of challenges which our staff expected, but even with those challenges, we have made tremendous progress. We are working in an environment that looks different, it feels different, it sounds different. Our mindsets, expectations, and standards are all being tested in this environment. Educators and administrators and employees of our district, we are all kind of perfectionists, and that mindset serves us well in a typical year, but this year is everything but typical. We hold ourselves to a high standard, which is what makes our district a premier district. That high standard is also a challenge in this environment because we do not want to disappoint. An admirable quality, but in a challenging, unpredictable, and anxiety-prone time, the high standard adds pressure, which is difficult to manage as we navigate these uncharted waters. Our employees are exceptional. They are responding with pride and fortitude as we would have predicted. As I look deeper into the school year and into next year, we will face additional challenges. And my worry is that making sure we have all the capacity and bandwidth necessary to face those challenges and find solutions. Employee fatigue is real, and we feel it in our system. As we work to support our current model, wrap up our building projects, and find new routines, we must be cognizant of that fatigue. We must find ways to seek out the positive, to energize one another and focus on what is working well. It's no easy task given the evolving conditions. Tonight, each director will provide an update on their respective area as it relates to our reentry plan. Directors will highlight what is working well and what we've learned, and ultimately that new knowledge is used to improve our operations. After the directors present, we will share our current COVID data and finally wrap up the presentation with a review of the state mask mandate. It's always good to start with a picture of our students, and again, this is an updated picture, so you see them wearing the mask, and I am pleased to say that our students are responding extremely well to the mask mandate. I've been out in the buildings, as have directors, and the students are extremely compliant. They put the mask mandate on like they do their jacket or their hat as they go outside or as they enter the building. So they're very compliant and very respectful and orderly, and are following the mandate that we have put in place and the state has put in place. As we think about our reentry plan, we're guided by these principles: access, quality, and safety, and those continue to guide us as we make decisions throughout this year. Our plan is ever evolving. We don't have a well-defined playbook, and nobody does in this environment. But what we do know is that we will find the best solution. We will exhibit pivotability. We will be flexible and understanding and make certain that we provide access, quality, and safety for all. Our first director who's going to provide a presentation is Ben Irwin, the Director of Business Services.
Thanks, Todd.
You're welcome, Ben.
For an update, just going to go over the current budget situation and enrollments, how that's tracking. In terms of finances, we have spent just over $400,000 so far in COVID-19 related expenses. These are expenses above and beyond our normal budget, so things we have to track on this year. Half of it's about equipment and supplies, and the other half's roughly staffing that we've added in terms of cleaners and nursing support for each of the buildings. The plan for supporting these costs has primarily been from the surplus that we had from the 1920 school budget. As a result of the closure in March, we ended up with a surplus in the 19 budget of about $500,000. So that's going to help fund a lot of those costs. In addition to that, we're also working with the CARES Act to receive additional funding through the ESSER grant of about $50,000 that we'll see on our end. In terms of enrollment, the third Friday count was conducted last week on Friday throughout the state and all public school districts. That report is due at the end of this week, and as of right now, it's being pulled all together as we prepare for submission. Similar to many other districts in the area and across the state, we are seeing a decline in enrollment. For us, it's been majority from withdrawals, late withdrawals in either late summer or in the fall, or from an increase in our open enrollment out students that's gone up by roughly about 30 students. So overall, our head count's down about 60 students this year from last year. But the silver lining for that is that our residence count, which is factored into our revenue limit and state aid, that is not down as significant. That's probably closer to 15 to 20 students. So that helps from a financial side of things. The other kind of positive from it, I guess, is that we're not seen as a severe downward trend as other area districts. When I reached out to some of the other North Shore districts, they're seeing losses of over 100 students for this fall. So obviously a lot of different approaches for instruction to begin the year, and I think while the decline obviously will have an impact on our finances, it could have been a lot worse in hindsight. So we'll continue to track on that, and once that report's finished and ready for submission, a full report will come back to the board for review. Any questions on that?
Is there any idea where exactly those students went? Or can we track all of them or some of them, or are we just?
Brandon, can you repeat that and pull your mic down?
Oh, I'm sorry, forgot about that. Is there, of the students that withdrew or went to other districts, do we know specifically where they went, or we just know generally they don't go here anymore?
So what we do know is where the open enrollment out students go. And so we've been tracking on that, and you know, we saw a big uptick in some districts that offer or have a kind of more robust virtual school. So I think that definitely contributed for at least the open enrollment out students. The positive with that is those students can very easily come back into our system and be part of our program again. Beyond that, it is a little bit harder to track if they go become homeschooled or if they go to a private school. We are not able to track them as easily, I guess. We'll probably go through it a little bit over the next couple weeks and grab what we had for over the summer and see kind of how we can track them that way. It'll probably involve, you know, working with the building secretaries a little bit and kind of going through that. Because during the summer, we were actually anticipating, and what we were showing was an increase for our head count. So I think that the fact that we're a growing community helped offset a lot of what we could have seen on our end. I think also the board's kind of pre-planning and getting everything kind of set earlier rather than later really helped kind of provide some stability and direction for a lot of our families. I know when I reached out to other districts, a lot of the feedback they received was, you know, the approach we had led to families being unsure, and if they're unsure, they just kind of opt for something either virtual or homeschool or something like that. There are other models that, maybe a hybrid model too. I know that led to some families going to either a private school or another area district where they had 5-day in-person instruction. So I think overall, I mean, it's obviously we like to see increases in enrollment, and that's what we've had over the last couple of years, and having a decline will have an impact on our finances. But overall, you know, it seems to be a common trend in the area, so.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Next, we have Director of Buildings and Grounds, John Coster.
Good evening.
Evening, John.
I'd like to speak specifically to the personnel for sanitation and getting the facilities clean, because that's pretty much of a hot button that we're dealing with right now. We're happy to announce that we have a full slot of full-time and part-time employees. So our standard cleaning throughout the day and our standard cleaning throughout the evening is fully employed. We have everybody in place, including the new hires for the new square footage. So we've accomplished that, and we're fully embedded. We have 2 new employees who have worked out dynamically. And we're so fortunate to be able to pull some of these hires together. And quite frankly, they caught on really quickly and are doing quite well. The COVID cleaners is another issue. So as you are aware, we staffed, or appropriately staffed, the board did X amount of COVID cleaners. At this point in time, what the board allocated was about 570 hours. What you're going to see on your Google Doc or your board doc is for 1 day. I put it in there for a week. It's a mistake, so I changed that on the current PowerPoints for those who are viewing it. The 167 hours, or I'm sorry, the one that you have on board docs is for 1 day. Multiply that times 5, and that's what we currently have. So 570 hours a week were allocated for COVID cleaners, and we've been able to staff that at about 30% at this point in time. We're going to continue to hire. We're going to continue to advertise, continue to push forward. We found it to be extremely difficult to get these hires on. What I didn't realize is thinking that this employment world that people are looking for jobs. Well, they are looking for jobs, but they're looking to apply for jobs, not necessarily work at jobs. So we had about 180 applicants. of which we interviewed approximately 80, of which the interviews scheduled, 4 of them showed up for interviews, believe it or not, and we hired 2 of those people. So the other people that we've hired and brought on are either via overtime or via Facebook that we found, or other means of advertisement that we brought people in. So we're continuing to push. We're putting an ad in the paper this week. And quite frankly, I think that these jobs are a perfect fit for some people. So if anybody's out there, they're part-time positions. They're during the day. We have some in the evening. We have positions available for people, and to make $15 an hour for a part-time gig isn't bad. So we're going to continue to press forward. But again, we're working at about a 30% clip of what the board approved. And if we remember correctly, the board approved that as a maximum. That was not necessarily the level that we'd obtain. We'd like to be at about 60% to make sure that we're covering all these square footage, but we're moving ahead and we're doing a lot. Administrators are pitching in. Our custodial staff is working double time for this, and we're trying to do everything we can to keep this safe and sanitary.
So your staff is working double time, you said?
Well,
Or a lot of
double time
overtime?
is a reference, but some of our staff is coming in on overtime, working a couple hours overtime to accomplish the COVID clean. So our PM workers will come in a couple hours early and clean over the lunch period so that we can keep the lunchrooms and the classrooms, because many of them are meeting in the classrooms, sanitary and cleaned up. That's extra COVID time. What we're looking to do is replace that overtime with COVID cleaners, if you will.
Sure.
And those would be the $15 an hour employees. At this point in time, we're doing the best we can to just fill those voids, finding it that difficult to get people in.
Yeah, and I know your staff and other staff as well work very hard to get the buildings open in time, considering the delays we had because of COVID-related issues through the construction project. But like Todd had said, employee fatigue is an issue. So I just want to make sure, I know your staff and probably yourself are, very dedicated to the building, but I want to make sure you don't get burned out. So
Yeah.
appreciate all your work. But
Yep, they're working hard. We're offering that as a carrot, and hopefully we get some people to replace them. We're working hard to do that. We got an ad going out as early as this week, so we'll see what kind of response we get to it. We found more locally, the people who we're finding that are more successful are local, are the people, the moms, the fathers, the grandparents, those people that want to come in and just work a few hours, and we're happy to have them.
that's great.
So, okay, thanks.
John, just a quick
Thanks,
question.
John.
I know the part-time staff is what you're after, but I think you considered looking for full-time as well. So
Yep.
if you have 6 or 7, 10 part-time needed, that'd be the equivalent of 3 full-time. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you might have posted or.
We did hire 1 full-time, and we made it very clear that it's a 1-year offering, and that should something come up, that position may not exist. So the people who are applying for those positions are well aware of what the termination possibility of that position is, in the event that something will come up with COVID, or at the end of this thing, if everything, by the end of the school year, we start next year and everything's different, God willing, that position would not exist. So this is not a lifelong endeavor as far as their position. It's a one-time shot. So we're just trying to do what we can to fill that spot, cover square footage.
Yeah, just being creative instead of
Yep.
looking for part-time,
Yep.
see if we can fill it with a full-time.
Yep.
Instead of part-time.
We actually moved one of our full-time employees to a rotational day, so we're spinning them off into some of the COVID clean just to assist where we can, and then filling that void with a sub at night. So,
Well, thanks for all your work, John.
okay, thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Next, we have Director of Human Services Conrad Farner to talk about and give you an update on staffing, which is a critical component to our model that we're offering our students.
Yeah, I can echo everything John said. The pool right now for part-time employees is virtually non-existent. You can see on this slide, we've got 7 special education aides that we also have not been able to fill. I've talked to other HR directors around Southeast Wisconsin. They're all experiencing the exact same thing. It's very hard to attract people right now for a wide variety of reasons. One being most districts have already added significant numbers of staff because of COVID. That hiring started in the summer. All 45 Southeast Wisconsin districts were doing it, so that significantly drained the pool of applicants. There's also a lot of people that don't want to work in a COVID environment, so that's also repressed the pool dramatically. So the approach we've been taking lately is trying to get positions as full-time, hoping to attract because they have benefits, but many districts can't even fill full-time benefited positions right now. And so the main thrust we've been doing is trying to use our existing staff as creatively as we can. So that's adding hours to our part-time staff, overtime for our full-time staff, and just continuing to be as efficient as we can. So this slide, I won't read it to you, but you can see we filled our last couple positions for teaching jobs this week. We had a couple late resignations that were directly part of the pandemic. We've got one more professional position, a long-term sub job that we have been posting since August, 0 candidates. So that's going to be one that we'll be keeping our eyes on. Substitutes, extremely difficult right now to try to get people to come to the buildings. And again, that's common for all the districts. Support staff, we did fill one position this week, so we're down to those 9 vacancies, 2 aides and 7 special education aides. And then as far as COVID updates for our staff, these numbers are cumulative. And as of this day, we have had 9 staff members test positive since July. We had 9 staff isolations then. Those positive tests result in isolation. And we had 9 staff quarantines total to date. We know we're going to have one more next week for a couple days. So we're doing everything we can. Those isolation quarantines are unbelievably stressful. The good news has been when our teachers have been testing positive or have to quarantine, in almost every case they've been able to teach remotely. So the students are still getting their regular teacher teaching them, but we have to put another adult in the classroom to help supervise those students and ensure safety. And that is an incredible cost and an incredible drain. It's an incredible cost if it's a sub, and it's an incredible drain when we use part-time people in other positions like reading specialists, reading interventionists, library media people, aides, paraprofessionals, whoever it may be, administrators at times. Somebody has to be in that classroom. We can't just leave the room without an adult body in the room. And so it really is a significant strain. We've got some, reading and math interventions not happening. Reading specialists can't focus on helping our teachers be better reading instructors because they're being pulled every day to be helping in these classrooms and help deal with all the quarantines and isolations that we have. The contact tracing, thank goodness we have Nicole Kofta doing everything she can do to help us with that. That's an incredible drain then on Nicole and the administrators who have to make all those calls every time we get a contact, every time we have a potential exposure. So it's been a pretty demanding first month. And I would say, we've done okay, but we're at close to what many would consider a breaking point. The hard part with the staffing is we don't know on any given day when we might not be able to get enough subs to staff because all of a sudden we had 3 teachers go out, for instance. That's what's really, really hard because we're always on edge because there's just no way to predict when that day could come, that we have a significant number of classrooms where we don't have anybody that can be in that room. The plan in that situation will be district office administrators will be stepping in as needed. Building administrators will step in as needed. We can get through a couple days like that, but that's not going to be ideal by any stretch of the imagination. And so it's at that point that we'll have to start talking about what are the options as far as pivoting. Any questions on that slide?
Yeah, Conrad, I have a question. On your vacant positions that are open, so we have 7 special ed aides and 2 other aides. Did those people not return from last year, or these are new positions, or what happened to the ones we had in that position?
It's the usual mix of those things. Some have been people that didn't come back from last year. Some are additional positions. In some cases, we've had people actually fill a position and then leave since the school year's even started. So it's a combination. This is unusual. Typically, we would have almost all of those positions filled by now. So this is definitely an unusual year.
And then my second question on quarantines. So I completely understand what the quarantine process is, but is there any measurement whether those are exposures at work or whether those are exposures in the community that are requiring the quarantine? Do you have a breakdown on that?
I'd have to go back and look at it in detail, but I can tell you that it's a mix. Most of the exposures have been from outside. Staff have contracted the virus outside of the district on the weekend typically. There's a lot of exposures where it could have been your spouse or it could have been your child. Either got exposed at their work or exposed at their school or their daycare. And so then because the staff member obviously lives with their spouse and children, so right there, then that also becomes a possible quarantine situation. So it's all of those, a combination of every one of them. But definitely a pretty significant number of our staff have contracted the virus outside of school.
I was asking just about the quarantine, which is that kind of exposure, not necessarily positive test, just so that we're making sure that our staff members are not exposing each other is kind of what I was.
No, I would
just
say
kinda-
within the buildings, it's been very minimal. You know,
Okay.
whenever there's been a positive case, the tracing goes into effect immediately. We start looking at which students might have been exposed, which staff. We've had very little of that. There's been some, but the distancing measures have been really good, and that's helped a lot. To a certain degree, you can't avoid some of it.
That's great, thank you.
Could you explain the difference between an isolation and a quarantine?
I will, but Nicole can correct me. Generally speaking, isolation is what's associated when you have had a positive test. If you test positive, you need to be isolated, and it's 10 days, and you can come back as long as you are symptom-free for the last 24 hours, don't need medication to keep the fever down. That's an isolation. Quarantine tends to be a 14-day quarantine, but that can go longer depending on the situation. If there's a family-type situation where there's an exposure of a sibling, you have to wait till that sibling's clear, and then it could be another 14 days, and that could happen on the 10th day, so it could be a 24-day type of quarantine. So that's the biggest difference. Is that close, Nicole?
Yep, that's great, thanks.
Hey, Conrad, I know you mentioned before in previous meetings about having those floating subs. Did we ever get the floating subs, or we're just maxed out using them
Nope,
already?
we were very fortunate. We got one per building right now, and I just was talking with teachers on call today about possibly seeing if there's any way to maybe get more.
Yeah,
But those have been huge for us. Those have been used every single day.
yeah,
Pretty, really not a lot of options. And some of those para positions that have been vacant, we've had some of the building people have been able to fill that role as well.
yeah.
So yeah, they've been a huge asset for us so far this year.
Yeah, it makes sense too, right, because there's guaranteed hours there from like that sub perspective. And if you can get more, it might be a nice way to shift into like that pending leave that you have. You can play a little bit more shuffleboard with it, so hopefully some solutions, but
Yeah, the more bodies we can have on hand, the better.
yeah.
So the next table gives you a comparison from last September to the current September. Pretty dramatic difference. Interesting, personal day usage dramatically down, primarily because so much stuff isn't happening. So the reasons teachers might take a personal day have not been there. So that's gone down from 16 to 2. Sick days, not too radically different there. We did have the little bit less time this year because we started school later. But that number, 33 to 21, is not a significant difference. But then you can see the number of quarantine days has been huge. Literally since before school started, we had teachers quarantined right off the bat, first week of school. And so that's created a huge strain on the system. Instead of averaging a little over 2.5 absences, we've averaged well over 6.
Where are the isolations in there? Is that in the quarantine number?
That would be counted as the quarantine. Yeah, I just used that broader title to make it simpler.
Okay.
And to just give you a little bit of a visual from 2019-20, this would have been September of last year, literally day by day. You can get a sense, the graph, it goes up to 12 on the far left, the y-axis is a 12 scale. So you can see how few absences we had last year. Those are just sick days and personal days. And then when you compare it to this September, you'll see a dramatic increase because of all that green representing all the COVID-related quarantines and sick days.
Conrad, I have one more question. So on the quarantine and contact tracing, I understand the county's, health department is extremely maxed as far as the ability to do that. So did I hear you right, that we are doing that ourselves, and we're making the determination about whether somebody has been exposed or not via phone calls and investigative measures, just like the county did?
Yep, Nicole's done the bulk of that work, and she's helped train the administrators when administrators have also helped do it. I don't think we've used anyone besides administrators, have we, Nicole? Okay, and so health room aides have also, that we've added some of those people, we've tried to recruit them to help. It's a script that we give them to help just ask the right questions. And have we got a little bit of help from the health department on occasion? So we're working with the health department, but the bulk of the tracing has been left.
Dates as in sort of when the quarantines end, when the isolations end, that type of thing, they're
Exactly.
telling you that. Yeah.
To be clear, though, the county health department said that they couldn't help, right? They were overburdened with that at some point, and they encouraged us to do it on our own. Is that right? Sure.
So just to clarify, are you saying they gave us the option whether to do contact tracing or not do contact tracing? Or have them do it delayed or us do it real time? The second one.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks.
I think, Brandon, when you look at the community spread, the health department is deep into that contact tracing, and they have put school districts just on notice that they're working on community spread and dealing with that, and they have said that it's best that the school do conduct the contact tracing. And research does show that the quicker we can get on that, the less spread there would be within the system. So I'm pleased with the work that Nicole and the administration and her health aides are doing, because she's all over it. And I think it's a lot quicker than if we were to rely on the health department.
Conrad, did you say there was a script that the staff is using for contact tracing? Is that something that I think would be helpful if the board could take a look at that, just so we kind of know what's going on?
I would imagine we could get something, Nicole.
Thank you.
Conrad, I have a couple questions. Obviously, the graph that we're looking at right now does not include the vacancies that we currently have, the 7 special ed aides and the 2 supervisory aides, correct?
Correct.
Last year, we would have had the majority of those positions filled.
Yeah,
so.
this is just the absences of actual staff we have employed.
Right, okay, which kind of makes this year's numbers a little bit more frightening. You said before that we were close to a breaking point a couple times this year. Do you have a threshold number of staff absences? Not that, I'm sure it's probably not a solid number because it depends on who's in which building and things like that, but.
Yeah, we really don't, because we don't know how to come up with that number. You could have a whole big outbreak in a building, but if there's subs available and they can get it covered, it's tough to argue that there would be a reason to close.
Right.
And yet, if that happens in 2 or 3 buildings, boom, 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 right after each other, pretty good chance we're not going to have the subs that we need. And so then that's what's so hard about this is it's not like a snow day where there's 8 inches of snow and it's a pretty cut and dried decision. It's really hard to know on any given day or week what it's going to look like, because so much hinges on our ability to cover when a staff member is home.
Conrad, the people, the adult in the room, does that, let's say if you have a teacher in quarantine teaching from home, does the adult in the room have to be a certified teacher, or could be a volunteer from the community?
It really, we'd want them to be a certified staff member. We've really been trying to have it be another teacher, and in the vast majority of cases, it has been another certified teacher. But it could be a paraprofessional, it could be an aide, it could be an administrator. We haven't talked about volunteers, and I guess we'd have to have some conversations about that.
Sure, okay, I was just wondering if that's an option or not.
It potentially could be, but
Yeah, okay.
there's some downsides to that as well.
Oh, no question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it was
Yep.
potentially an option.
Yeah, I would say it should definitely need to be a district employee, one that has been hired by the district and not just, someone's dad.
Thanks, Conrad.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Conrad.
Thanks, Conrad.
Thanks.
Next, we have the Director of Technology and Assessment, Kristen Rose.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So from technology, we have a lot of the same kind of updates for you. We're still working with our teachers with their Chromebooks and desktops. We've added additional hotspots for our families who have internet service that might not be adequate or can't afford to have internet service in one or another home if they split homes, our students. We've been working through video conferencing issues. We've had updates to video conferencing software. We've had, all of our families are now able to use Canvas with their students. So our implementation of Canvas K-12, we added kindergarten through 5th grade. So we're fully working through Canvas with our teachers and training them, and our teachers are getting their courses updated weekly. We've added extra webcams. We first put webcams in the hands of the teachers who had students who would be at home. And now as we have some isolations and quarantines, that group of teachers who need those has increased. So then we add more and do more training. And we have added a temporary hire. So we have a leave in our department. Our instructional technology or our digital learning and innovation coach is on leave, a family leave. And so that is a key position to support our teachers in this learning environment. And so we were able to hire a substitute to support there. So that has been a lifesaver for myself and the members on our technology team. Something new for us this year is this on-demand support. When you have students at home and their technology doesn't work, that means there's no learning going on. We do have alternate activities planned for students, so if you do get disconnected from a live interaction, teachers are preparing their students and families with choice boards and other activities if they had technical difficulties. So if their internet goes out or their Chromebook breaks or something, then we need to support them. So we have a support desk for those families and students at home. And also that on-demand support is also for those teachers who are streaming into the homes for our students. If that teacher has an issue, those students can't learn. So that's the on-demand piece that has become so important for us. So it's kind of drop everything and run to the building where they need support. So we have a whole new group of parents that we support, because our parents are at home with our youngest learners usually. And we have a whole group of parents that we're supporting with Canvas use. So that's been a support curve, learning curve for us. We have someone on the help desk on the phone at all times. Parents are coming into the district, dropping off a Chromebook, picking up a hotspot, meeting us at the door, doing exchanges. This isn't working, how do I do this? So a lot of new support opportunities for us. So that's some of our challenges with our staffing, and how do we allocate adequate staffing and time for that when we're already trying to do the regular work we do. Another challenge is something that's seen in most districts that are using Chromebooks is the Chrome OS, the latest Chrome OS was optimized for video conferencing and had some bugs. And so we get students who get kicked out of a video conference and then they can't get back in. And so we have an update that's rolling out tomorrow, October 1st. And we're crossing our fingers that that will help for a few of our students who have a recurring problem. So we're working through those types of things. Connecting to home networks. Wi-Fi in the homes not being consistent. So troubleshooting that is difficult. It just adds a number of variables to what we're trying to support. So we do have these auto updates every time our Chromebooks update. They do it on their own. It's a rolling update. You don't have a lot of control over that, and sometimes software has bugs, and something starts happening, and you're like, what's going on? We're having these problems, and figure out what the pattern is, and oh, that might be it, and how do we troubleshoot that? The other thing that we have that we're working through is we have a new wireless network in the district. And with the limited availability of getting into our buildings, into our spaces with our construction projects, we haven't been able to fully vet that wireless network. So we'll get a help desk ticket that says that a student in this room can't connect to Wi-Fi. Well, it's a back corner. How far away from a access point? And we need to fine tune that access point range and details so that we have full coverage in our whole building. So we're discovering some of those things that we would normally find over time. But right now it's really, really crucial, more so than ever before. So we're working through it, getting there. It's always a different day. Everything's changing. I have an amazing staff that helps support all of our learners and our teachers and our families. And they're doing a great job. Any questions?
Yeah, this is certainly rough timing for you to bring on the new technology and new classrooms and then have this pandemic going on. Really stresses your group, so I appreciate your efforts in working through it and getting everything up and running as quickly as you can. So thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, and technology has never been more important than it is currently with everything that's going on, and you know that better than anyone in this room. But just really appreciate all your efforts to keep the kids and the parents connected, no matter if they're in the classroom or at home or with grandma and grandpa or someone else. And it's really a lifeline to keep our mission going. So thank you for all your work.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you, Kristen.
Next, we have the Director of Student Services, Ted Knoll.
Good evening. Just a quick update, a little bit of an overview, and with any overview, you're going to speak more generalization, so I apologize if I state something that isn't specific to a certain student as I'm talking, but, and I say that because as I look at our students as they transition back after a 6-month absence, I think most principals and our student services staff have really been pleased with how our students have transitioned in and make that personal adjustment, and it's been a really nice experience for them. We've had some bumps with some students, just like I mentioned, because the generalization doesn't always apply. But our student services, staff is working with those parents and students when they are struggling a little bit, making that move back in. But now being almost 4 weeks into school now, most of our students have really, really appreciated the opportunity and are making a nice adjustment in. As is anything with COVID, we're doing things differently. Our counseling, student services program is, still continuing to work with students, but more virtually. I think that's one thing they all noted, that, students are reaching out, asking more questions via email, or receiving some assistance via the Google Hangout, and that's been different for them. They haven't liked that as much because they enjoy the student contact just like everybody, but, students are adapting, parents are adapting, and they're doing more virtually now, so we'll go back to what, after COVID leaves us, but right now that's kind of how business is operating within student services, and, things are still getting done, which is awesome, and kids are still getting supports. We're sending quite a few resources out to families and parents as needed. We're trying not to inundate our families with just more emails and digital resources, but, we are getting those out and hooking families up as they need it. As with any bump in the road in life, some people need more than others, and we're making sure that they're getting those resources. One thing I noticed, I was hearing from the high school, our Pat Sorensen, our school psychologist, he's kind of noted that the universal COVID accommodation, things around masks and different changes in schedule, going outside, and he sees that as benefiting all students, because there is that kind of chance to decompress, walk a little bit, take your mask off, you know, maybe kind of socialize, social distance, you know, type of thing. So he's like, so there's some things kind of happening just by happenstance around COVID that are kind of benefiting all. So it's kind of neat to kind of watch that, just seeing, you know, because, you know, it's happening and you know, students are benefiting in a variety of different ways. You know, one of the things that we talked about over the summer is we were gonna be reinforcing and are reinforcing kind of those, you know, classroom procedures as students come back because of the layoff. We knew that students were gonna need some extra reinforcement and reteaching, and that's been going on, and that's really been paying off. Students have really picked up where they left off in March and are doing a great job and moving forward. You know, community building we talked about over the summer as well, and that's going on. I think students are benefiting from extra time and emphasis from teachers. You know, just hey, you know, what is it like to be part of a classroom experience again and learning together? Even though we can't do as much as we did before COVID with you know, interacting, we're still part of a community and what that looks like. As everything in COVID, we're still moving on. We're still doing our RAMP ASCA process. Our high school counselors allow me to mention that it's in a modified format, but they're still working on that, and we'll continue this year. So everything is modified, but it's still moving forward. One thing that our high school counselors, you know, mentioned was interesting is our post-secondary schools, our colleges and universities. They're operating very differently. So our high school students have had to adjust as they apply for colleges and try to take tours virtually and communicate with the admittance programs. And it's been a whole new experience for everybody. But it's happening. One thing that I mentioned too is, you know, students are very thoughtful in terms of what does next year look like for me, because if this is going to continue, do I really want to, you know, do I want to take a gap year? Do I want to do something different? Do I want to go to college? So that the conversations have been different because of COVID, which is you know, understandable, but we're adjusting just as post-secondary are to the different things they're dealing with. But it is a whole new world trying to help students and families make that next choice about what to do after high school. As Conrad mentioned, our special education program, we've had to do some adjustments as well because we have, I think it was 7, then Conrad said, unfilled para positions. So we've really had to prioritize to make sure that we're meeting IEP minutes with staffing and high-need students, and coverage of classes and things like that. So that's been a bit of a challenge that our staff has done a great job being creative, but, you know, it's definitely, you know, putting a bit of a strain on our system. The other thing was balancing scheduling and organizing the needs of in-person and virtual students. I think that's been something, you know, in the spring we were all virtual, so everybody could focus on virtual. Now they're balancing a caseload, you know, primarily. We have one special education teacher that's fully remote, but most of them have 1 or 2 or 3 students on their caseload who are virtual. So they're having to balance those that are in person versus those virtual, you know, versus those that, you know, are needing something different. You know, helping kids that are virtual keep up with their general ed classroom stuff as well. So a bit of a balance on their part.
So the 7 special education aides that you're trying to hire right now, I guess I'm well aware of what the special education staff does, not necessarily the aides. So a couple things. Can you walk me through what a typical aide would do in the building and who's doing it now? And how are you getting through that? Because it's hard for me to get my head around. You know, we don't have 7, and I know if we could, we would, but just what we're doing.
Right, and luckily, you know, they're not all in one building. You know, they might be one position here, one position. So generally, they're spread across the district. A special education paraprofessional provides assistance to students that don't need to be specialized or taught by a special education teacher. So particularly supervision in a bathroom, supervision on a playground, maybe support in a classroom during a heavy academic time. Those types of things, generally, you know, some behavioral support around socialization, you know, students who struggle with that. So what we've done is we've looked at schedules and how to support, you know, definitely those that have minutes in IEP, so we're meeting our obligation legally, but then how to support in general too, because some of our pairs are assigned to specific students, which we've kept, and then we have those special education paraprofessionals that might be on playgrounds and doing lunch duty with special ed students, and how to cover those duties as well.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Ted, kind of to piggyback off that question from Chris. So we don't have any gaps right now with IEP students that require a paraprofessional as part of their IEP, correct?
Correct, we've made sure we've covered those needs.
Yeah. Okay.
Ted, just curious, do you know off the top of your head the number of special ed students who are in the virtual environment versus in person?
I do not know off the specific number. It's broken when we first started. It's been breaking about the similar 80-20, 83-17 split. We've had some of our special education students transfer from virtual to in-person once they realized it was not a good fit. We've had some students receive or do a bit of a hybrid where they're getting their special ed instruction inside the school, but receiving their general ed instruction virtual. So we've had some students do that as well. So it's not a clean break.
So the 7 aides that we're trying to hire are based on that 80-20 split still, though? Is that accurate, or is it based on your current needs?
That's based on current needs.
Okay.
Thanks, Ted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ted.
Next up, we have Director of Instruction, that would be Alan Groth.
Good evening, everyone. The slide that I put up first is just to give a context for the slides that I'm going to share this evening, just going back to parent choice and the selections that they made for the first semester. So we have roughly 552 students whose families selected virtual or at-home instruction. So the next slides that go with that will kind of give you a context of how that works. So roughly 500 kids. So the next slide shows you, I just thought it would be helpful to define for you some of the language that we're using as we're communicating with families at home, and even for this presentation. So only in person, of course that means, and this is through the instructional lens, so if I'm a teacher, which one of these areas are how are my students organized? So only in person is, if I'm teaching, all those students in my classroom are all in person. So they're all just typical pre-March, everyone's physically there. A blended is a combination of at-home students and in-person students. And only virtual is strictly all the students in my classroom. Actually, you can't see them, or you can see them, but through the screen. So those are all students who are at home. And remote is a newly defined term that we've been using in a lot of parent communication. So remote is a short-term instructional change that has occurred, and it could be due to a health reason, could be a quarantine. So remote is short-term, typically could be up to around 2 weeks, might be a little bit longer, could be a little bit less depending on the circumstances, but remote is something that occurs, and so we've titled it that way. So the next slide shows you how we practically staffed. So as you know, we surveyed parents, and they had till a little bit towards the lower half of August to make a decision on their selection for the school year. So you can see this chart is set up by elementary, middle school, and high school. And so then principals with their teachers had to determine how they're going to actually set up the staffing. So you've got your teachers in your building. How am I going to literally place them with students? So elementary, you have roughly 62 teachers that are teaching only in person. So those are teachers that have kids that are arriving to school every day, and they're strictly just the students in their classroom. Then you've got another 10 teachers who have blended classrooms. So those 10 have some students at home and some students in person. And then only virtual, we have 4 teachers at the elementary level, and those are in partnerships, actually 2 teachers in the room because of the sizes of the groups, are only virtual. So no students in the classroom, so I'm teaching to them all at home. So roughly about 31 teachers at the elementary level have some sort of virtual connection to students. The middle level, you can see how that broke out. So only in person, about 10 of Webster's teachers are strictly only in person. 17 have blended classrooms, so some students at home, some in person, and 15 sections. So that if I'm a teacher at Webster and I have 4 courses that I teach, that means one of the classes that I teach, that's a section. There are 15 of these that are only virtual. So each principal, you can see what's happening, each principal working and looking at the needs of the students and the parent choices, making decisions on how to staff and organize this. And then at the high school, this is, and it kind of scaffolds too. So at the high school now you've got basically 100% of the staff are set up to do a blended model. So I might have 25 kids in my class, 7 of them are at home, and the rest of them are in person. So every teacher at the high school set up to pivot that way. And that roughly gives you 65. So almost 130 teachers in the system are teaching some sort of blended virtual approach. So how about 130?
Can I ask you a question before you leave this slide?
Mm-hmm.
The remote teachers, the 17 approximately, would all of those have been in-person teachers?
Great question. Thank you for asking it. So the remote, those would likely have been strictly in person. There are some situations, though, I could have been a blended teacher, and some of the students that are in person have had to be quarantined, so they go home. So I'm already set up and designing my instruction in a very blended format, so they're able to stay with me, and it's very fluid that way.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, in-person or blended would make sense. Okay, thanks.
Yep. So the next slide talks about elementary remote instruction, because this is, we've had to pivot quite a bit here. So I want to just explain how this works. So why? So this is set up for students on a short-term absence or quarantine. And what? It's an instructional content for a grade or course. So it's providing the instruction that you would have received if you were in person at home. And how do they access that? So this is varied right now, because in some situations, just like the question I answered for Mr. Kennedy, if I was doing a blended model, there's quite a seamless transition. Those students are home now. I've already been syncing my content into Canvas. I'm doing lots of streaming. I've already been working that way for the past month. On the other hand, my partner has only had in-person, and now my partner's got 6 kids at home. So they've been using Canvas, they've been setting up their course, but what's happening is it does require a rapid learning curve. So we need to go to that teacher, help them set up for live streaming. We need to ensure that they are comfortable with whatever technology needs they have, and so we typically take 1 day to get that all set up, help them get organized, and thankfully they're using Canvas so they can still provide the parents and the student content. They can see it. It's just a matter of how much streamed content will they provide. So what we're going to guarantee is that everyone has access to an education in Cedarburg. So if you go remote, we're guaranteeing you will be provided instruction. Sometimes there might be some things, could be a combination of some things sent home, some things live, some things that are not live. So the teacher has to determine how they can navigate that best, but we're always going to guarantee they will receive an education. It may look a little different from room to room at this particular time. So it gives you, and that's why I have the word variance there. So it is quite a bit to navigate. I've been in classrooms at the elementary level. I think one thing we recognize, certainly, these are our youngest children. So think of 4-year-olds at home on a device, parent by their side, and we're going to do a Google Meet, or I'm going to teach you how to, I heard one teacher just talking about how they had to, with precision, show through the screen how to hold a crayon, just the pencil grip and how important that is in letter formation. So all these details take a great deal of thought and planning. And so just recognizing that, as I know you do, elementary level in particular, there are youngest learners, and the independence level is different than a middle school student or a high school student. So the next slide, I segmented some of the successes, continued successes, challenges, and
Alan?
Yes.
I think I did this to you last time. I'm going to have to hold you up for a moment. We posted that no later than 7:30 we would allow for public comment. Nope, you got 15 minutes.
I thought, wow, that's kind of ironic. I'm the guy that's...
All right, get going.
Keep going, okay. So the successes, challenges, and in the works. So successes, access. I think that's exciting. It's exciting that we're open at home, we're open in the system, students are getting an education, and we can celebrate that. Student learning is taking place, kids are learning and growing. Regardless of the pace of the content, students are learning, and we celebrate that. Instructional leadership cannot be underemphasized, and I just want to point out teachers and their principals and all the support staff in their schools, the relentless effort to make it work. Problem solving, things come up that you can't anticipate until you live through it sometimes, and it requires you to put a great deal of time and thought into your communication out to parents and students, and just keeping everything running smoothly. The instructional leadership is just phenomenal, and so we really celebrate that. Some of the challenges teachers have openly talked about feeling, and I would say I hear this a bit more at the elementary level because I've been in some of the elementary schools a lot right now due to just the nature of all the environments that they're straddling. Differentiation, being able to meet the needs of individual students, and I would say probably secondary and high school teachers would say, yeah, there's challenges there. It's like when you have students in front of you and they're in the classroom and you can meet with a small group, it's super fluid. They're there, you see them, you can see the puzzled look on their face maybe, or a question that they have, and it's easy to just go by their side and talk to them, or pair them up with a partner and work on a group assignment, or whatever it is. So some of that's just the nature of doing business in a virtual environment. Some of that, you just recognize, I can't get to that like I used to. And so with that comes concerns like, is this student not succeeding at the level that we hope? So we continue to push through that and recognize, and even as up to this evening, had a conversation with a group of virtual teachers about approaches that we could perhaps take to try to get into this little area, not this little area, but this area in particular to help support all students. Pacing. You know, I personally can identify with the fact that things take longer. So when I think of March, April, May, all through summer, and the volume of meetings that we've had to just strategize, plan, meet with people, takes a lot longer. So then take that and overlay that with kids. So it doesn't clip along at a pace that you typically would have in a classroom. So what we're starting to see is that if you're my colleague and you're teaching students in a virtual environment, could be only virtual or blended, and I have all in person, I'm clipping along, I've got the in person, we're clipping along just like always. However, the virtual aren't clipping along at the same pace. There's just natural questions that come at making sure everyone's connected, and just a whole variety of different things that would occur. So we're seeing that, teachers are identifying it, and we've got to talk about how we can adjust things, recognize the pacing differences. Our goal is to provide a similar instructional experience for kids, and that the content, they would be getting the same content. So pacing is becoming a bit of a challenge in spots. Time. So time for teachers to kind of relates to the differentiation, meet with students, time for planning, time to even flip content. And I use the word flip. Flip is where you pre-prepare content. You could have a video or something digital you're going to show kids. You're going to speak over the content and explain something to them, and you just link it. And so you don't have to watch me on the screen. You can just watch the video. And kids need a blend of that, because if you I've personally been in that situation where I've been in a meeting for almost 8 hours and you're constantly on the screen. It's extremely fatiguing. So providing kids a variety is important. It takes time to flip content. If I'm a teacher and I'm preparing for all my instruction today and I've spent my whole day teaching and answering parent questions and doing Google Meets, the flipping is almost impossible. There's barely any time left. Consensus pretty much is the volume of time it's taking teachers to be thorough in the virtual environment is really a lot. So we see this as an area that we're trying to problem solve and look for some solutions on that. And I mentioned that in the final column. Disengagement, I've heard, yes, in this environment where we do see some students that don't look present. So there's been some relentless efforts on scooping them into the mix and doing whatever it takes to keep them engaged. And there's, of course, been just a slowing of district initiatives. So our focus and priorities on learning today and the needs of our staff and our students. So other things just take a little bit of a backseat right now. So in the works, we are looking at some schedule refinement. So I have a sub-team working on just looking at the volume of how to structure a day. So we have a schedule. Teachers are using a schedule that they currently have. It's probably the most stable at the middle level in high school. Elementary, though, due to the age of the children, we're wondering if it should be exactly the same and should there be some adjustments there. So I have a sub-team that we're going to work. I've pulled samples, pulled some research, and we're going to start looking at if there's some subtle changes that we could make to make sure that the experience at home is even more effective and also allows time for teachers to meet with students a bit more. So with that all said, there's lots of things to celebrate. There's challenges as you would expect, and we're trying to get after all of those. So.
Before you leave this slide, Ellen,
Yep.
I had a couple quick questions for you. The challenges areas all make sense to me because I can imagine, we kind of knew this would be a challenge for these reasons on differentiation and pacing. I would hope that being data analytics is so important that we can track that during this quarter and semester and try to see how kids are scoring, whether they're in the virtual system or the in-school system. And then from that data, compare it to previous years when we were all in person, or what adjustments can we make as you're talking about trying to modify some things, because there'll be data that comes out that might be beneficial to say, how can we tweak this to make some changes there? But I don't think you're ever going to solve all of these, but I would ask you to try to consider that. And the other quick item I have is in the far right column on the structure and of the schedule refinement, especially at the elementary schools. I think that's a great idea to look into for the younger kids and how that day evolves, especially early in the year, how we can make that work best for them. So I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, and I think parents have been, I mean, we get a lot of feedback, and others more so than I do directly. So I know parents are very appreciative. They see the effort, and certainly there's far more streamed content and live content, but it also does come with a cost. So it's just finding that right balance. So that's what we're working on right now.
Yeah, I appreciate you working on that.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
All right, is there anyone from the public that would wish to address the board? Raise your hand if you'd like to. Okay. I'm going to read a disclaimer real quick, and then you are free to come up one at a time. In the past, the State Attorney General issued guidance on how governmental bodies such as school boards should conduct the public comment portions of their meetings. This guidance was given to assist the governmental bodies in avoiding violation of the state's open meetings laws. The essence of this guidance is that unless the topic being brought to the board by the public is listed on that meeting's agenda, no significant discussion can be held on that item. Instead, the topic may be listed as an item on a future meeting agenda, whereby discussion could then be held. The reason for this guidance is not to limit open discussion, but rather to ensure that all interested parties have equal opportunity to participate in the discussions with the full school board. We on the school board encourage community input, and we want to hear from you, our constituents. However, we also take the state's open meeting laws seriously, and will follow the guidance as outlined by the State Attorney General. Therefore, if an item is listed on tonight's agenda, open dialogue may occur between the individual from the board and the board members. If it is not listed, the board will be limited to listening only and will not be able to respond to comments or questions. If your item is not listed on tonight's agenda and you want to have a discussion regarding the topic, you're encouraged to contact the district superintendent and request that your item be listed on a future meeting agenda. As always, you're encouraged to discuss any issue with individual board members on a one-on-one basis outside the meeting setting. Please make your comments to the board and not to any individuals in the audience. As per School Board Policy 167.3, each statement made by a participant shall be limited to 3 minutes. Please note that this is a public meeting and we ask everyone to address one another with the courtesy and respect you would like to receive in return. When you approach the microphone, please state your name and address for the record. As a reminder, this meeting is being live streamed via the district's YouTube channel and will be posted on the district's website. Thank you. So, anyone want to go first? I don't think it is.
All right, we're good. Jennifer Collins, W59, N783 Highwood Drive. Superintendent, members of the board, a week ago, Ozaki Washington Health Department Kirsten Johnson stated there were parents knowingly sending their children to school who had tested positive for COVID. She also mentioned there were issues with people sending their children to school earlier than quarantine would allow. There have also been instances of parents refusing to test their child for COVID when they are symptomatic and sending their siblings to school. We can no longer rely on individuals to do the right thing while they jeopardize the health and safety of our staff and students. The Ozaki Washington Health Department data continues to show an upward trajectory and an increasing amount of positive cases. There's evidence of widespread community transmission. Wisconsin over the weekend had a record-breaking amount of COVID cases and overall ranks third in the nation for daily new cases. Recently, a Wisconsin teacher, Heidi Husley, died. She was going to teach from her hospital bed on Zoom. On September 28th, a previously healthy 19-year-old former resident of Cedarburg passed away from COVID. I urge the school board to move to a 100% virtual instruction model in order to keep our educators and students safe. Do we really want our district to be the next district with Heidi Husley? Should your educators plan for a sudden absence due to contracting COVID and have their sub-plans ready? I urge you to focus on and preparing and creating a plan for moving to 100% virtual. I urge you to reject a hybrid plan and instead focus on creating smaller class sizes. Spending an inordinate amount of time on planning for things such as moving to hybrid only stalls the process of setting your staff and students up for a seamless transition in which everyone is prepared and can fully access instruction. Should we really keep asking our overburdened educators to pivot, and then pivot again, and then pivot again? We have witnessed in the past how much time the board spent on hygiene theater to our present moment where we are still short COVID cleaning staff, failing to recognize that the virus is spread through airborne transmission and does not discriminate. Last, I urge you to immediately survey anonymously, begin discussions, and hold meetings with your teaching staff to ask their opinions in regards to your current plan to identify what is and what is not working. I urge you to visit the schools. I've heard stories of educators in your district under huge amounts of stress, breaking down in tears, considering quitting, and considering taking a job elsewhere. Since the start of these discussions in July, I've heard one educator and one school secretary speak publicly. This is a red flag to educators and members of the public who notice it. I urge you to speak with your educators, all of them, and to show them you value them by allowing them to speak openly and freely without fear. Schools cannot function without teachers, and teachers cannot feel valued unless they are heard. As Conrad Farner stated tonight, we are nearing a breaking point. Let's prepare.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Jennifer Meldman. I live at 300 Bobolink Avenue, Grafton, Wisconsin, 53024. I want to say that I completely agree with the previous speaker and everything that she said. I did not have a lot of time to prepare because I was unaware of this meeting until about an hour before it began, so forgive me if I am not thorough. I want to address something that you have stated multiple times during this board meeting, which is that your staff is exhausted. And I am sure that the superintendent and all of the other district administrators are exhausted. I am a former teacher. Teaching is exhausting in the best of circumstances. People are exhausted. I often think about what is said when you go on an airplane and the airplane is in an emergency and the airbags drop for oxygen. The number one instruction you are given is for the airbag to place an oxygen mask on yourself first and your child second. Teachers at school are the parents to these students. The teachers are exhausted. If we do not protect our teachers from exhaustion or COVID, we do not have a school. We need to think about that long and hard. If you are providing students with a great experience and they are coming home happy every day, but your teachers are stressed out emotionally, physically, you are not creating a quality school experience. Secondly, I would like to address what was also mentioned about the COVID spread, and I would like to know how much longer I have, please. Is anybody keeping track? I have 1 minute. My final point is this. When I checked today, the burden in the Cedarburg school, on one of the Washington Ozaki Health Department site, the burden currently for 53012 is 367.8. According to the Washington Ozaki Public Health Department, their guidelines for schools, when the burden is greater than or equal to 350 cases, schools should be completely virtual. We are a data-driven district. We make decisions by data all the time. Please look at the data. The data does not lie. COVID exists, and it's going to become more and more present in Cedarburg. We are risking the health of our staff, our students, and our entire community. You have a tremendous responsibility, and I urge you to act swiftly. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Sarah Haas. I'm at W73N371 Cedar Point Avenue. I have 2 children in the West Lawn Elementary School and 2 children in the high school. Over the summer, I was on the fence about the kids returning to school in person. But after watching all of your school board meetings, reviewing your 41-page return to school plan, and discussing the return to school policy as presented with our pediatrician, I felt comfortable in trusting the Cedarburg School District with teaching our children in school in person. Unfortunately, my trust and faith in the system was broken during the second week of school. After picking up my twins from West Lawn Elementary School, my son informed me that a child in a class that was quarantined due to COVID was in his class. But Mom, don't worry, he's immune. I'm sure you can imagine my heart broke, my stomach stank, and my thoughts of dread went into overdrive. No parent should have to find out this type of information and such a diversion from the current written policy from their second grade student. Later, I was informed that another parent requested their child stay in school, and the request was granted. This deference given to that family of the one child affected the lives of 40 plus others. The lack of communication from the principal and the district is at the very least disheartening. I feel like we had a deal, a contract. I accepted your terms outlined in your procedure, and I sent my kids to school. Our contract was broken. My faith and trust in the Cedarburg School District and the principal at West Lawn is broken. If communication was presented prior to the start of school on Monday, my decision to send my kids to school would have been mine. I may have altered my decision, but I wasn't given that opportunity. I feel let down, mad, and hurt. I feel that as a parent, I maybe made the wrong decision. I'm asking that you increase, and I guess in this instance, start communication with all families, not just the family that asks for preference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Hello.
Good? Yeah?
Yep.
Gina Stupak, West 55, North 253, Van Buren Drive, Cedarburg. I am a West Lawn, Webster, and Cedarburg High School parent. Tonight I would like to ask the board and our district to do better. I ask that we not lose sight of what makes us Cedarburg strong and Cedarburg proud when it comes to our schools. Ultimately, it's not our buildings, curriculum, or sports team. Our district is one of the best because of our educators. These men and women who have been dedicated to our students and community for years and continue to be dedicated through what arguably has been the most trying 6 months of their career. I'm here tonight to urge you all to take a pause and a moment to really make sure what we are asking our educators to take on is mentally, physically, and emotionally possible. I'm asking that you look for more guidance from these men and women whose responsibility it is to carry out the plan we've put in place for them. Our educators have and always will put their entire heart and every ounce of time they have into making our students feel cared for, accepted, respected, and learning in the best way possible. I would expect nothing more from our board and district to make sure we are treating them with the same level of respect. While I recognize that much of the situation remains fluid and ever-evolving, actual execution of our policies needs to continuously be reviewed, not only in board meetings, but also with all the stakeholders at play, including teachers, administrators, parents, and district leadership. My younger children were part of a recent quarantine class at our elementary school. The virtual education they received during their quarantine time was second to none. Their teacher was able to clean slate from a parent's perspective, jump into a virtual situation, and educate my second graders to the best of her ability, making it a positive experience for my children. But we can't take one example and assume it will be the same across the board. From an outside perspective, it went great. Ultimately, it went well though, because she was able to have all of her students in one place, not balancing in-person as well as virtual students. Everyone was on the same time frame for their quarantine, and we all happened to get notice of the upcoming quarantine on a Saturday, which allowed her to spend the weekend preparing. You could say all her stars aligned for the best temporary virtual experience she could have asked for. Yes, she's super amazing. But this isn't the case for others and won't always be the case for other temporary quarantine situations going forward. I urge you to take time this week and reach out to the educators that have been affected by recent positive cases and whole or partial class quarantines. Learn from their experiences and make sure the policies and procedures set in place are something that we can achieve. We need to reevaluate the expectations we set as a district and as parents this year. Overloading our educators with unrealistic expectations will only cause them to burn out and ultimately affect how they are able to perform and the level of education our children are receiving. Our educators are not replaceable or disposable. They deserve to know how valued they are in our district. They deserve to continue to have the opportunity to collaborate on how things are implemented within our schools. I ask that the board continues to seek input from those that are in the trenches. Together, we can all do better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Anyone else? Okay. That will end the public comment portion of the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to Cedarburg High School, Mr. Kurth.
So board members, there's been individual conversation between myself and a few board members, and certainly between Mr. Kurth and Mr. Groth regarding the CHS assessment practices at the high school. This was rolled out as part of their reentry plan, and Mr. Kurth has been here twice and spoken to this, and there seems to be some additional questions, and I thought it'd be best for Mr. Kurth to come and share the practices at the high school. I think you'll find the presentation very thorough. It takes you on a little bit of the history of the work of the high school and does demonstrate the different ways in which students are assessed in the high school setting. Adam, I think I'll give you this since you have so many slides, you can control it.
All right, thank you, Todd. As Superintendent McNackey shared, there's been some questions to the board and from the board, and my hope tonight is just to be able to answer those and further arm the board with all the information you would need to answer any questions. And feel free, it's a pretty hearty presentation tonight. I'm going to speak quickly to save some time, and I'll be as succinct as possible, but feel free to stop me at any time that you have a question. So we will start with our commitments through the Cedarburg High School. So our assessments, we hope to always provide comprehensive assessments, rigorous assessments, and multiple means for a student to display their learning. This is an all-inclusive approach to assessing our students and knowing where their knowledge is at and making sure that we're putting them in a good place to succeed. So the history of assessment practices, we've made some adjustments as we've come into this pandemic era of learning. The adjustments aren't as drastic as they may seem because there's been a history leading up to this point. All that happened was because of the pandemic, it gave us an opportunity actually to speed up our process and really embed some of the tools that we've learned over the past few years more appropriately and with more immediacy. So in 2015, the district underwent, and this is prior to my arrival, a Future Teach programming which taught our staff and worked with our staff about authentic assessments. In 2018, the district brought Diana Laufenberg to work with our staff, who worked on deeper learning, which talks about more project-based assessments. And then I'm also going to reference John Hattie, who is the foremost researcher of educational practices. You know, anybody in education looks to him. And he did a meta-analysis, a study of studies, 1,000 studies that he looked at of education to put a number literally on what works best in schools and what's most beneficial for our students. So I'm going to touch on that with our assessment changes, adjustments that we've made in the current environment. So the goal of CHS is to create assessments that assess student knowledge and comprehension through the application of that knowledge. Now, when most of us were in high school, a lot of what we were assessed on is content, and we worked to apply that content you know, later in our lives through products that we had to create or through the work that we engaged in. Now we all know that most content can be found in our hand with our cell phones or a computer at this point. And so our goal is to teach students how to use the knowledge that they have. Now, knowledge still has a value. We want our students to be socially aware when they leave our walls and move on. We want them to know who Shakespeare is and some of the basics of education. That is content that and knowledge that we feel is important. So there is that part still, and we still assess on that. But our goal is to move up Bloom's hierarchy here because the higher you get, the more embedded the learning is with our students and the more that they can apply that in their own lives as they move forward. Pardon my rudimentary approach here. This is from John Hattie's book. The picture in the middle is his guidance for everything that he does. So as I shared, he puts a number on everything. It's a sliding scale, 180-degree scale. So in the red, you'll see practices in schools that are detrimental to student learning. In the yellow, you see practices that a student could do without formal schooling. And the orange is kind of where we live on a day-to-day basis. That is what we do, traditional educational practices. And anything over 0.4 or that blue area is where we strive to be as educators, and that's where we're embedding the learning deepest with our students. So on the left of this image are the two current studies that John Hattie did on what would be final exams, summative assessments and a final exam practice. And what you're seeing is they live in that orange area. They are high in the orange area. Final exam practice, which is the top left, is very high in the orange area, so we see that there's benefits to those assessments. But it's not in the blue, so it's really not driving student learning further forward. The bottom is what you would consider study guides, teaching our students how to take tests, those sort of pieces. And so the two of those both live in the orange, and we're hoping and working towards the two graphs on the right, which the top shows work examples which we would consider like project-based learning, which is where you give a student a challenge and they have to use the skills that they've learned to display that. And so you can see that that's in the blue and really drives students to learn in a different way and apply that knowledge. And the bottom one is feedback, which is the biggest part of this. One of the biggest drawbacks from semester and final exams is the limited feedback a student gets. If it's a semester class, they get 0 feedback. They get a grade on their assessment. If it's a class that's year-long, they get minimal feedback because we're moving into the next content. Final exams, you get almost no content almost no feedback other than a grade. So our practices that we're changing to, we're hoping to hit this bottom right corner graph where we're having a really significant impact by giving tremendous amount of feedback to our students with a new structure toward assessment. So this is what it would look like ideally. This is, again, a rudimentary image, but the looping is ideal for learning. And what you're seeing here is the U represents a unit. So unit 1, you have a summative test 1. The looping would entail the student takes the assessment, they loop back to any skills that are necessary to go on that they need to apply in unit 2, unit 3, unit 4. So that's the looping, and it also refers to looping back to gaps in learning. So as I give a summative assessment, I'm going to know where my students struggled, and I have to loop back to reteach that in a different way. So the point of this picture too is traditionally our assessments would have a lot of short dashes, and then it'd have one big dash at the very end, and that's a final exam or a summative assessment at the end of the year. And this is a much more effective way to assess our students, because if you took Unit 5 test without any Unit 1 information, you're not going to be successful. So the scaffolding of all that is a much better way to impact our students. That's what we've been working on for a while, and this new style of learning that we're adapting to in the pandemic has really driven us to hone in on these practices and really embed them into what we do. So why are we adjusting, or are we? The or are we is because we've been working on this for years. We showed the backstory of it. And on July 29th, you all made the decision to have us teach both virtually and in person. Our staff are doing a tremendous job with that, far better than I could have ever asked. But teaching through those two venues and in a pandemic has its own challenges. Our labs are limited, our group work is limited, other instructional strategies that they typically use are limited. Engaging with both slows the process, as Alan Groth just spoke to. Everything is a little slower in this. But our staff are doing a tremendous job of navigating all of that. So assessments, what we learned in the spring shutdown really taught us a lot leading into this year. Teaching through two different mediums, has different challenges when you're looking at assessments. And some of those challenges are listed. The replication of past practices due to physical limitations. So I'm talking a tech ed class where the final assessment could be to change the brakes and the tire on a car. You're applying all that you've learned throughout the year, you're doing it yourself. We don't want our students at home changing mom's tire without supervision and then having her drive on it without a teacher there to assess. So we've had to adjust to those sort of different changes. Transfer from one medium to another. The paper test that we used to have, which still has value and we still use, transferring that to a digital format is a challenge. We need programs, we need understanding of how to use those programs. Academic integrity has always been a challenge since the days of crimp sheets and writing cheat sheets on the bill of your hat or on your palm. Now it's a different way. Students are texting each other, using digital media, using apps on computers and phones, and so there's different challenges to academic integrity. Time, as Alan spoke to as well, the time to implement these new strategies and to modify and to change from what past practices would be successful to these, it does take time. And experiences for in-person and virtual learners should be as similar as possible. We made that promise to our students and to our families that our students at home would have as similar an experience as possible to those in class. And if we're giving a paper pencil test to our students in class, it's not going to be a similar experience for our students at home. There's benefits to one or the other. So we want to try to provide the same experience for both. Exam week. So this is a summary of our teacher leadership team. So we had our department leaders, which is 10 department leaders who have a tremendous history of our school and building and understand the build up to today. Our building leadership team, which is a group that's voted on by their peers, and 5 administrators. So 23 of us have had discussions on assessments and how to do it best this year and how to best serve our students. These are some of the reasons that the adjustment was made to change away from the traditional assessment weeks, the semester exams and the final exams. The first being traditional times are always forced in. The idea that I'm teaching an 18-week class and all my content fits perfectly in the 18 weeks, I'm going to give an assessment at the end of it, that doesn't mesh with best practices. Best practices are I teach, and when I finish a unit or a system for my students, I assess them then to know what they've learned, and then I can circle back with that again.
Adam, just if I can interrupt real quickly. Yep. We've been told that nothing was going to be changing with regards to the exam practices, and it looks like you're proposing something that's just radically different, and if you are, I think it probably should go before the curriculum committee as a kind of a starting point to flesh out a lot of these issues.
Yeah, I guess that would we would need to determine if what we're doing is very different, because we are still assessing our students both formatively and summatively. We're just not having an exam week where we have half days and formal exams.
I think there are a couple of board members who asked that question and understood that we were having exams just like we always do. In my mind, I think we still are, as far as I think we should be. If we're going to make a radical change, I think it's something that needs to be discussed. And there are a lot of, I see a lot of issues here, a lot of potential issues that probably should be looked at. But I just think it's probably something that should be before the curriculum committee as a starting point.
I'm willing to continue.
I don't know how everyone else feels, but that's my feeling on it. I mean, it's kind of a surprise, to see this today.
Yeah, I'll jump in if I could. I've been making a few notes, and things like the pyramid, when you showed that, I agree with that. I think the evaluation and synthesis that you talked about there and the things that were listed there on, solving issues and inferring information and predicting are all very good skills. That doesn't have anything to do with the final exam. It's a way.
I'm sorry, I missed that last part.
That doesn't have anything to do with final exams or non-final exams. It's much more of a model of educating.
Sure.
Which I agree with. Things like when you did the looping page, I agree with that. But I've had many exams in my life where it's cumulative for the whole semester, so you're covering the items in S1, S2, S3, S4, maybe more in the S5 portion, the stuff that you learned at the end.
Sure.
That can all be done. That doesn't say you can't have final exams. It's just an educational approach. So I haven't heard anything yet in this presentation that says, oh yeah, this is the way to go. And I do think these types of changes need to go to the curriculum committee and not by, it sounds like quite a group of people, 23 people worked on it over the summer, but at least I'm not on the curriculum committee, but I wasn't aware that this was in the works, and it was a surprise to me, and I was under the understanding, no, it's going to be pretty much the same as it always was. But it sounds like as we go through this, it might be quite a bit different. So if we could continue, I'll save my other questions till the end.
Sure. Well, maybe some of these points will help because the field of final exams is still going to be offered in different types of testing, if that's a concern. Student mental health is something that our staff is concerned about. Learning in a pandemic area in 2 different venues is very difficult. It can be better allocated toward learning time. So in a typical year, we're allocating 5 days towards exams. Our staff believe that time is better absorbed into learning, and they can assess throughout rather than allocating a few review days and then half days toward a final exam. Know that our staff took it upon themselves. Those days are also used to close up semesters and grades. So our staff felt so passionately about this that they're doing all their grading, end of quarter, and transitioning into new classes at night on their own. So that was a decision made by them, which they accepted because they believed that that learning time that we absorbed back from not having the full exam weeks was truly beneficial. And
I'm sorry, are you going to be like asking us to approve something here, or what are we doing? There are like 40 more pages.
There's no, I was not asking the board to take any action, Dave, on this. It was through the conversation I had with individual board members that this came forward to get clarification on what do final assessments and exams look like at the high school. I do think there are some examples, as Adam goes through his presentation, that will give you some insight into what types of exams and final assessments and projects that are being required by staff in the high school. And if there's greater clarification that needed or more dialogue around it, I think it probably would be wise to go to the curriculum committee of the board and have a conversation about it. I think what Adam is capturing is some of the past practices as well as the current practices. And maybe the practices have developed over time at the high school, and that has not necessarily, maybe the presentation or that information coming to the board maybe hasn't been as fluid as it should have been years prior to Adam, because I think there's a journey that has gone on for some time. And Adam's presentation is not about the elimination of exams, because I'm certain there are teachers that are still going to give exams, but there are plenty who are looking at final assessments in a different way that are, I think, just as meaningful as the traditional final.
Correct, and that's my point. We were told that the exams are going to be taking place as they always have. The first thing that we heard was that exams are bad and we're going to be doing things different. That may be true, but it's not something that should be just being done and we'd be informed of it after the fact, especially when it's contrary to what we were prior told. You know, this is something that if we're going to make a radical change like this, it may be a perfectly wonderful thing to do, but it's something that has to go through the normal process, through the normal channels. And I don't know how beneficial it's going to be to have a conversation tonight about, I guess, what's already happening, even though it hasn't gone through the process yet. Do you follow what I mean?
So I think too, what you're probably going to get to more is like these assessments have all already taken place over the past couple of years, kind of like what Todd just said. These are assessments that may take place in world language or in English. They don't always look like a test. And so I think the idea here is that we might see these happen maybe a little bit more frequently on how we're testing students. The content of what's being tested and when is still the same. But maybe a couple of these more, I guess, not so summative, but more like project-based or video-type assessments might take place to make sure that you're capturing that audience that's going to be virtual or in-class students who are going to have to be quarantined at testing time who then have to be virtual. So, you know, it's obviously more discussion can happen in the curriculum committee to maybe fill in those gaps. But I think want to keep in mind that it's not like these are radical new changes. These are assessments that have been taking place, but just they might be coming in more situations than they have in the past, is kind of how I understand it. I know you have more to go through, but.
That sounds like part of it, perhaps. But if you talk to any high school student, they're going to tell you that we're not having finals or midterms this year. There's a kind of a blanket rule. That's what the families are hearing, or the students are anyway. And again, if we are going to be moving from something that is fundamental as exams, then it should be going to the curriculum committee. It should, because there are a ton of really important issues baked into this presentation, some of which we may be doing, some we may not. We don't know until we go through the process.
And I think building that context will help, because I think that's more semantic than anything. Because midterms are going to happen, they're just going to look a little different, is kind of how I understand it.
Correct.
It might be a video of someone speaking Spanish versus taking a test, but it's still a midterm, I guess.
Correct.
Can you show me a syllabus that has a final exam or a midterm exam on it?
Things inherently had to change this year because we went from a student having 7 or 8 classes at a time to 3 or 4 classes. And so that exam week was never going to look the same, simply because of that structure change. So if a student has
Correct.
3 classes, to have an exam week didn't make sense. It doesn't fit appropriately. So inherently with the schedule change comes a change in structure. And so all that does is it allows the flexibility of the timing of those assessments to take place.
That's not what you're saying, though, Adam. You're saying that we're doing different types of assessments. And that's different than what we were told prior.
Yeah, the different parts of the different types of assessments is to address a different part, which is the academic integrity. So we're doing different things. We still have not necessarily paper pencil tests because with virtual and in-person learners, but traditional style and traditional structured tests. If that's what you're asking.
I think there's some good information here in the slides that you presented, Adam, in the following slides you have in here, but to get the level of comfort that some of the board members need to move forward in this direction. And I think it's a good direction, as Kevin alluded to, with the pyramid and evaluation being at the top, and then, you know, and everything else that you presented. I think those are all great goals. But I think we need to bounce it back to the curriculum committee and just get the level of detail that they need to get a level of comfort, so they can go back to our parents who have questions, and just to really be comfortable with it and to support you moving forward. We really need to have it brought back to curriculum, or brought to curriculum, and to give that detail. So I don't know that it would be an effective exercise to continue with the presentation at this point. I'm going to continue to look at it, and if I have any questions, I'm going to reach out to you. But that's what I suggest we do. I think it'd be a better use of everyone's time if we could just have you scheduled at the next curriculum committee.
Yeah, and the next meeting is next week,
Okay.
so it would be real quick. I think we
Sure.
could get this on.
Does that sound good to everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the curriculum committee, and Adam, I think this is actually tremendously helpful and useful, this explanation, just because you're giving us an update on how assessments necessarily have had to change based on the environment that we're dealing with, and how that change isn't maybe as radical as it's being perceived, I suppose. It seems like if we're having an issue, it would be the amount of time that some assessment needs to last, since typically exam blocks are longer than a normal class period, if I'm not mistaken. When this type of assessment comes, should it all come in 1 week in January, or should it be spread throughout a semester? And maybe, I don't know, we haven't gotten to that yet, if it should count as X% of a semester or a final grade, which probably it could in any sort of assessment procedure that you'd set forward if you had the foresight to figure out how much things were weighted. But this makes a whole bunch of sense, and I know that as an educator and as a foreign language educator, a number of my quote-unquote final assessments don't come in a traditional paper and pen type of test, because I kind of don't care how well they can mark paper to pen when they're trying to speak a foreign language fluently, right? These alternate assessments they've had have necessarily had to have been different for a number of years if they're to be worthwhile and accurate assessments of their progress. So I think these things necessarily have had to morph. I don't know, I have no problem at all hearing more about this in curriculum committee, since we're not necessarily taking any action on it there or here. I appreciate the update, and I don't really know what it is we'd be seeking to not change, or seeking to change back to. But I think so far, and I've looked only a little bit ahead, I think this has been a valuable bit of information personally.
Thank you.
And it might just be gaining comfort in the whole assessment model, and things moving forward from the traditional stuff that we're used to as a board.
All that being said, I think we owe it to staff and administration to give them clear direction going forward. We're already into the semester. I would like to make a motion that we continue with our past practices done over the spring exams of 2019 or the fall exams of 2019, and continue all courses in that manner for final exams. In the meantime, please work with the curriculum committee and the full board on any changes that you'd like to see.
I'll second that motion.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yeah, I don't support that. I think that we would be taking away the teachers' creative licenses to come up with how to best assess their students. I also don't want to be the one to look at 65 different final exams, which look probably a lot like the ones on page, I don't know what page, but this one, to determine if they are valid enough. I'm not an expert in all those content areas to know if that would be the best assessment that they could give their students, or the best way of assessing their progress and their understanding and their learning throughout a semester. And I don't think any of us here are. So I would really have a problem taking away the experts' opinions on how to best assess their students, not just at the end of a semester, but I think that would affect how they assess their students throughout any given semester.
I would counter that with, my daughter just graduated college this spring, and her second semester, of course, during COVID was very different than, or her very last semester was very different than, people had planned in the past. However, the university went out of their way to say, we're going to keep as many things as normal as we can, which includes exams and assessments and things like that. I'm not suggesting it be the same exam that was given in spring of 2019 or fall of 2019, but the concept is there, that there is the same. If that course had, let's say, 4 exams through it, 4 tests, and they were all 25% weighted, they should remain 25% weighted, I'm saying. If there was an exam, a final exam that was 50% of your grade, and your other quizzes were added up to be the other remaining percentage, that should remain that case until, as a board, and especially curriculum committee and a board, we make those changes. I just think this seems like, the first few slides we hit, it sounds like it's a done deal. These changes were ready to be implemented, and this is not what I understood it to be. And I'm surprised by that. And I think we need to give direction, one way or another, to the
I understand that, but
teachers.
wouldn't it hold true that a teacher that decided to give 4 assessments throughout a semester at 25% each, and a teacher that has given a 50% lump of quizzes and assignments with a 50% final exam grade, haven't they already made that determination in the past without school board approval to kind of take their own class in their own direction? And wouldn't it be up to them professionally to be able to make a change as they see warranted, whenever they see warranted, in the interest of their students?
I think what they've done in the past is a great predictor of future success, and I would like to see that continue until we knowingly and all willingly make a change. I mean, typically when you want to make a change, you present it like you were doing tonight. People think about it, you challenge it, evaluate it, challenge it. Well, what about this? What about that? How will this work? And then you come to consensus and vote on it. The early presentation here, that's not really the case. It's what the changes have been made. They're kind of worded the way, why things were done. That time can be better allocated towards learning this year. Their exams are not in the best interest of students' mental health in a difficult pandemic environment. It's more of an explanation of what was done versus a request to make a change. And I think you need the board's approval to make a change like that.
Adam, I'm sorry that you're caught in the middle of all this.
Yeah,
Have we had in Cedarburg School District professional development that was led by John Hattie or his sort of philosophical teachings?
We have not.
We have not. How familiar is our staff with Hattie's research?
Our leadership teams have just been through some discussions with me.
Okay. Because I'm looking at the effect sizes that he shows, and it seems like that would be a natural transition away from a typical pen and paper final exam to more creative ways of assessing students based on the effect sizes that he's done in a meta-analysis, which, as you said, is a study of 1,000 studies, which would provide more reliable data, I think, than any one district could possibly hope to provide.
Yeah, this will be exciting information to consider at the curriculum committee meeting. And Sam, just so you know, there are a number of courses that do, I mean, they don't just have written exams. Like I think French, for example, part of the final exam is a speech component, things like that. So it's just keeping things, I think the motion is just to keep things the way they've been that way, not to go back to pen and paper for everything.
And I don't think anybody's saying that what is here is not good or right or just. We're just saying that maybe it's not quite in the right order of how we typically do business. That's all. I think that's the message. That's it.
Yeah, I apologize. We were finalizing our building plan August 15th, and our teachers have been underwater since then. Assessments got moved further down the list. I put my faith in our teachers to assess our students appropriately and know where our students are and where they need to help them. So we've moved forward out of necessity.
And I know there's a motion on the table, but is it, I'm not sure how this works, Chris, you'll have to help me out, but I really think it should be maybe just discussed more. Like, I think more gaps need to be filled in and just understanding kind of what's being done before we proceed with that motion, but we can vote on it. I'm just curious if maybe we just need to have more discussion before we move to that, like in the committee.
Well, the reason I wanted to make a motion was to provide some direction to staff and not have it go another month or more and then say, gosh, now we're into end of October. I would like to have a motion where we're providing guidance of what we're currently thinking. Not that it might not, match this in many ways or 100%. It's just, we haven't vetted it. We haven't had a chance to evaluate it, to challenge it, to go through it. And I think that's what I'm asking, is that we keep out the exams that were done, the concept of how they did their coursework evaluations the same until, as a board and curriculum committee especially, works through these items. I think there's a lot of value, personally, maybe it's just me, in having to prepare for a final exam, whether it's only 10% of your grade or whether it's 100% of your grade. It is what it is, but there's a rigor, and you talked about the rigors of that. Whether you're going to technical school, into the military, or to college, that rigor of building your pyramid, if you will, for that final exam, and being prepared to do it is a good thing for us to teach children. And I just don't want to evaluate it because of COVID. That's what my thinking is.
So is it safe to say that however assessments were proctored or exams were proctored in the last semester is okay, right?
Well, yeah, my motion isn't about how to proctor them. I think they'll have to work through that because you will have people doing it online and people doing it in class. So they'll have to figure that out and sort through that. I'm not telling them how to do the tests. I'm just saying we want to have the same consistency we've had in the past with our coursework and how students are graded, whether it be the 50% final or 20% final. But I like that rigor of having a final test. And I get your point, Adam, about exam week. There's only 4 classes. Maybe it's not a week long. Maybe it's a few days. And maybe that's an adaptation that needs to be made and thought through and evaluated and structured. But I'd like to see us be as typical as we can be for our students. And that's why I think it was important to offer the 5-day model, because we're trying to be as typical as we can be for those parents and students who chose that. And for the other kids who went online and virtual, we'll try to do the best we can with that. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And this will be an adaptation to do that, to make it work. I totally get that. But I'm trying to give them direction that they should be starting to think about that before finals come. That's why I made the motion.
So then is the motion then, I'm trying to think how this will be interpreted by staff. Is the interpretation that we're looking for that whatever the instructors were planning on doing regarding a final assessment is okay? Or is the interpretation, you need to make sure you're doing a final assessment like you did last year, or else?
I don't look at it as an or else. I just look at it as providing direction to staff on what our expectations are. My motion was about continuing the past practices for coursework. And again, I'm thinking it breaks down into, if the class had a final exam in spring of 19 or fall of 19, it should have one again. If it was 10 quizzes and they were all 10% of the total score, they should be that way again until there's a decision to make a change.
So however it was done
However it
last
was done,
semester,
right.
you'd like that to be consistent and not a complete change.
Right, well, not quite last semester, because that was the COVID semester.
Right.
But the concept
2
is the same,
semesters.
yes. And in the meantime, I'd like to get this vetted and work through the curriculum committee, and so that next board meeting, there is a decision on how to do this or what the breakdowns would be.
And if we need to move faster on it as a board, we can always do that too.
Agreed.
But to Brandon's point, we got to go through the process.
And I think we very clearly heard in public comment tonight, people want transparency, they want communication. This is the first time we've heard about it, is a day ago, then they've not heard about it at all. So I think it all goes together, that we need to just go through the process.
I don't know if I'm just slow on the uptake here, but with the motion then, are we still telling teachers that it is okay, based on what Alan was saying a number of slides ago on how pacing has been an issue and the amount of content able to be covered in the same amount of time has become an issue? Are we saying that we are still letting the teachers modify their assessments from what they always have been based on the best needs of their students? Or is essentially the same semester exam given in the winter of 2019 expected to be the same assessment that is given in the winter of 2020? Because there would be a number of issues with that, as we've already heard. So is it okay then for the teacher to, with this motion, I'm just trying to think of how this is going to be interpreted, that the teacher still has license to change his or her summative final assessment, or whatever we want to call it, based on what the best needs of that person's students are?
Yeah, I didn't intend it to be getting to that
Okay,
granular
I
level,
just wanna
but
make sure, 'cause-
my point would be, I would think each year, I've taught a couple courses in my lifetime, just little courses, and you have to change your final exam. It's not fair to cover material you never covered, right? So teachers would be changing their final exam based on what, that's, I think, been done for centuries. You base it on what you've taught. You can't test for something that you never covered. It's not fair to do that. And there are teachers who take out the old exam, I've had that in college, and just give it to you every year. And you say, we never covered this. Oh, well, I meant to. So I'm not at all suggesting that. That would be the wrong way to look at it. I'm just asking the past practices done in those past 2 semesters be continued. And it's the concept of providing whatever quizzes or exams you had in the past, that those continue. Your grading percentages of how much that exam is, if it's 50% or 75% or 20%, that would continue until this can get vetted and thought through, because I think some classes, exams are very difficult. And I'm not trying to be a one-shop-fits-all approach, because that's why I'm asking them to do what they did in the past.
Right, and I seconded that.
I do wonder if, I agree, it should be vetted more thoroughly at the curriculum committee, and we have a meeting next Thursday, Dave, as you had mentioned. This presentation has been touched on in prior presentations when we did make modifications to building schedules. So the topic of final exams was touched on during Adam's presentation on the reentry. And I think when I look in hindsight now, hearing the conversation, this is more about process for me. And at that time, should have dug into that. I should have dug into that and said, okay, what of those topics and areas are we modifying as part of our schedule changes across the system that would warrant further conversation at the curriculum committee of the board? Because our adjustments across the system due to the pandemic have created obstacles and challenges with curriculum and pacing and assessments. And there is some latitude that teachers have to make those adjustments based on what they're dealing with at the time and what they see out on the horizon. So when I look at this in hindsight, it should have been processed a bit more deeply at the curriculum committee level. And I would recommend that it go back there and have a conversation around that. I think there's good work here, and Adam's staff has done good work and has done good work in the past. And under other administrators, they've delved into assessments discovering and reworking what is the best assessments that are out there for students, and how do we adjust our instruction to make certain that we are getting the kids the knowledge they need, and how do we assess them. So I think there's been great work along those lines. I'm a bit nervous when we make a motion regarding just assessments and quizzes, because I don't know that the board has ever delved into that level at any of the other, at the middle school or elementary. It would be something I think we have to think about, because it does get us a bit more into the practices and not necessarily at the policy level. I know we have policy regarding curriculum, we have policy regarding assessments, and there is latitude in those policies that Alan has given in administration and teachers. So,
Right.
I think going to the curriculum committee of the board makes good sense.
Right, and Todd, I agree with what you said, and a lot of these items might be very good to do. I just think we need to do that process, and until then, I'm saying, keep the old processes in place. That's all that was my motion.
I got it, Kevin. So we have, it's a week until the curriculum committee of the board, which is on Thursday. And at that time, if there's the presentation is made and there's agreement and consensus on how to move forward, then is the thinking, Kevin, we'd bring it back to the board at the end of October, and then if there needs to be a change to the motion that's made, then that would be made at that time.
And I appreciate at least Dave's offer to, if there's more meetings needed, I'd be happy to attend personally too.
So that is part of it, because
Right.
with our new structure, we're 8 weeks for essentially what would be a semester of a class.
Agreed. Yeah, that's why I wanted to provide direction. That
Right, exactly. And we can't wait till the next, we might have to have another board meeting if we make a change, like before the next meeting, a special meeting.
All right. Have a motion and a second. Roll call. Creer.
Aye.
Hadberg.
Nay.
Cox.
Nay.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Goldbeck.
Aye.
Reimers and I. Motion passes.
Thanks, look forward to working on this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Adam, for your time on that.
All right.
So just to bring closure to that, so we'll put that on the agenda for the curriculum committee, the meeting next Thursday. And Alan, I'm just putting you on notice that would be a topic that, and I think the presentation that Adam had prepared for this evening is, I think, an appropriate one for
good start, yes.
the curriculum committee to come. So board members, will continue with the presentation, and that piece of information that Adam was presenting was tied to Alan's piece and update from his department. And so now we're going to continue to talk about the reentry plan in a bit more detail on data. What you see in front of you is a slide that you've seen previously, and these are the areas that we tend to monitor and make decisions and gather information based on the data in these areas. And we are working internally on making dashboards that we can make public, and I'll share one this evening, and there's a couple others that are going to be posted after this evening. Clearly, the statewide, county, and Cedarburg COVID-19 data is data that we're tracking on. North Shore COVID-19 cases, that tends to be through conversation with the health departments, both the North Shore and the Washington Ozaki Health Department. Positive COVID-19 cases in the district and in the schools, we're going to share that this evening. Staff attendance rates, you did see that. That was part of the Conrad's presentation. And student attendance rates, we are working internally on how to best track those. We have all the information. We've entered codes into our system. So now we can determine if a student is home quarantined or is COVID positive. And there's a few other codes that really speak to the COVID, the pandemic, and through a mining process, we can extract all that information. And so we're trying to figure out the best way to get that into a dashboard so we can monitor student attendance. And you also heard from Conrad tonight about substitute teacher availability and class coverage availability. So this next slide is the dashboard that we provided to you in the past, and Nicole Kafta is here, and she can certainly speak to some of this as well. This is a snapshot, and you can see it at the top. It's September 30th. It gives you the staff number of reported positive COVID cases, and then the staff number of quarantine or reported close contacts. And it's by school, and then you have a general total on the right-hand side. And the next row would be the students. And you can certainly see that to date, as of September 30th, a snapshot, we have 5 student positive COVID cases, and those 5 resulted in 92 quarantines. So a significant number of quarantines based on those 5 cases. And that number 5 is a bit different than what you'll see on the Ozaki Washington Health Department website, and we'll get into a few specifics when we get there.
Can I ask a quick question on that? When I looked at the numbers, did we have a recent one? Because we're showing 4, but we're at the far right, we're showing 5 for students. Did we have some recent?
We had a recent one as of this evening.
Do we know what school that was in, just so I can?
Webster.
And then when you say cases, is that just someone with a positive test result, or is that actually someone who's like in the hospital or sick?
That's just positive case results,
Okay.
as reported to us. So there are individuals who may have COVID-like symptoms and choose not to get tested and just remain home quarantined.
Is it fair to say that the people listed in the active case would be somewhere in their 10-day quarantine period? Yes.
Part of that 92, Brandon?
No,
Yes.
no, the people that are positive are considered active cases.
Correct.
And there's, in some period during their 10-day mandatory quarantine period, right?
Isolation.
Isolation.
Yep.
And then that person comes off of the active list. Okay, just making sure I understood what you were tracking there.
So,
Nicole, maybe you would want to come up to the mic
Yeah.
just in case. Yep. Thank you.
just grab a chair over there, Nicole. Can you just repeat what you said to Brandon?
Yep, so active COVID positive cases, my question is, they're recorded on here, and that means that they are in some period of time during that 10-day isolation period.
Correct.
Okay, and once they are done with their 10-day, they drop off the dashboard? Because it says active cases.
Right. I think initially we were going to do total cases per school. I think that's how I understood it, is that we would list the total cases and then break it down according to active cases. So
And
right now the number is 5, but 1 has returned back to school. So our number of active cases where they're currently isolated yet, I believe is at 4.
So that was going to be my point, just to make sure it's crystal clear that these are in their isolation period, or they have returned and they're not active anymore.
Okay,
That's all I was going to ask for.
sure.
Yeah, that's a great question, but I think, Nicole, when I looked at the high school, because I thought we had somebody at the high school who had it, if I remember correctly, and we're showing 20 students quarantined from the high school, wouldn't we have needed an active case then? And now they're back to 0, so I think they dropped off the list. Right?
The student did drop off,
Okay.
yes, at the high school.
All right.
But the quarantine period goes 14 days,
Yeah,
and
the other-
isolation is 10,
Right, the other people are still in quarantine, but, yep,
possibly.
they're not counted anymore, though, to your question, Brandon.
Yep.
That number's now 0 at the high school.
Sometimes the quarantine could be unrelated to that one specific student, too.
Because we
Yeah,
get,
it could be family members, yeah.
right,
Yeah.
cases reported to us that mom is positive, so then the student is quarantined. So it's not always a direct link,
Yep.
school-to-school case.
Okay.
So this next slide is another way of looking at the data from student data over time, and we went back to the beginning of school and up through the 30th of September. And the red line is the positive, COVID positive cases, and the gold color is the number of individuals that have been quarantined over time. And so what you see here is obviously an increase, and for the last 6-7 days, we've been holding steady at 5 positive cases here in the system.
But again, I just want to clarify that today's actually should be 4. We're not counting total, we're counting cases as of today. Isn't that what we just said?
Yes.
So I'm just saying, it's not going to be this cumulative graph that just goes up exponentially forever.
Correct.
It should reflect what's active in the
snapshot of
district.
today.
Because you're doing that with quarantine clearly, and that looks fine.
Yep, correct.
So I'm just making sure it should be 4 today. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
So I share with you this data because many of the speakers had mentioned the increase in community spread, and I think as you see the increase in community spread, we will see these numbers go up. I mean, it's inevitable that they will. I can tell you that a lot of the mitigation efforts that we've had in place in the district are working to the extent that we had predicted. But when you have a positive case and you have students in class, maybe 20, you're going to go through the contact tracing process, and you're going to identify those kids who were in close contact, and those are the kids who are going to end up quarantining. And so we have that happening in our system, and we've said all along that our system would not be a COVID-free environment, but we would do our best to mitigate the spread. And I think this data is interesting because I have spoken to superintendents from other districts. Some are in a hybrid, and they have as many positive COVID cases, but their quarantine number is a bit lower because they have half the students in the system. And then I've spoken to a superintendent whose entire district is virtual, and they have 3 positive student COVID cases. So I think a lot of what we're doing is working for the time, and we'll continue our efforts. The next slide shows the staff COVID positive in quarantine. And similar type graph, you can see that by date, the number of positive cases, and then the number that have been quarantined by date. Clearly, the graph doesn't tell the entire story, and what you heard earlier from Conrad was the difficulty in staffing when you do have a quarantined staff member. He had mentioned that many of them are able to stream back into the classroom, but even in those situations, you still need a body in the classroom to work with the students and supervise the students. So the number doesn't tell the whole story, but it does give you an indication of the number of staff members we have quarantined or positive as of the 30th. Questions on the slide?
I have a question, Todd. On one of the slides that Conrad presented, he said that the staff COVID update cumulative to date there were 9 staff members having tested positive since July. And I see that the first number on that graph from September 11th is also 9. And so I'm wondering then if the 4 that are showing still feeling the effects of being COVID positive and in quarantine on 9/30, if those 4 were part of that 9 19 days ago on the 11th, or if those are different people, because it seems to me like they would be the same people.
Yeah.
They're different.
Well, that's quarantine,
Yeah.
not
Oh, sorry,
positive.
COVID, right, you're right. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I think it's helpful to look at the data this way so you get another view of it. The chart certainly does help and gives you a sense of the data snapshot, but it's good to see the data over time.
Right.
And I would just comment to all the administrators and Nicole, you guys are doing a great job. These numbers are awesome. We should be super proud of this. This is not alarming compared to what's going on everywhere else. This is great. So keep up the good work, keep distancing, because that is still the most proven way to prevent spread is distancing. So thank you.
On the next slide, I do want to take you just to the Washington Ozaki Public Health Department site, and Brenda's going to navigate this. This site has the latest information. You've seen this site before, board members, and we always start with just the main page which has both Ozaki and Washington County data, because our health department serves both counties. And Brenda, if you just go to Ozaki on that, up in the right-hand corner, you can see what Ozaki data looks like for our particular area. And you can see down the right-hand side, the confirmed by age group. And the largest, I should say, the groups that have the most confirmed cases would be that age group between 20 and 29 and 50 to 59. Nicole, should I just keep rolling and if you have more?
Sure, no, you're doing great.
The next tab, if you don't mind, Brenda, if you jump over there, what you see is the burden total numbers by zip code in both counties. And you can actually go through and select just Cedarburg. But before you do that, you can see there's a critical line there, and that critical line is at 350 per 100,000.
Todd, why is that a critical line?
That's just how the health department has determined that when you get the community spread at that level, or at that level it's community spread, and you can anticipate that the numbers are going to begin to grow exponentially in the community, both positive and quarantines.
Okay, are they putting any kind of hospitalization numbers in this dashboard yet or not?
If we went back to the prior tab, you can see that there's hospitalization rate on the lower left-hand corner, second over.
Is that like,
Ozaki and Washington.
Is that overall, or is it, like, do they do like any kind of like recent data? Because I've heard that that at least there's some theory that the virus is weakening, and I was just wondering if that was reflected at all in the hospitalization numbers. But I don't know if we can drill down that far in this dashboard or not.
They don't provide that level
Yeah.
at this.
Okay.
That's the total
Yeah, it's a
percentage
total.
That's
that
total,
have been
okay.
hospitalized.
Running total, all right.
Yeah. I do think all these data points here are good data points for us to monitor. I don't know to what degree that would influence a decision.
Right.
But relative to school, but it's all pieces of information that we gather and monitor. So if you go back to that burden by zip code, you can see the critical level is the purple. It's at 350. I can tell you the CDC has their critical level at 200. So the CDC, again, identifies that critical level at 200 per 100,000, and in Washington, Ozaki County, it's 350. And if you go up on the left-hand side there, Brenda, click on 53012, you can see the data for our particular zip code. And so you have the burden along the left-hand side, you have the months along the right, and you can see if you were to hover about, Brenda, before we had that steep increase, we were at September 10th, we were at 85 cases. Now if you go up to the top, you can see we're at the 29th, I think, and we peaked at 389 per 100,000. That's our entire community, all age groups. If you go to the next tab on the, Brenda, it says school data. And here you can begin to hover above different school districts and school district boundaries and see what the burden rate is for the school system. So if you go and click on Cedarburg, you can see the burden rate there is 284. And this includes all school-age students within our boundaries. So this includes students who attend private schools, who are homeschooled, OE out, or maybe attending school virtually. So it's all students. So you can see that number there is at 20. And you can see that our snapshot today on our data showed that, I believe that number was 5. What was it? It was 5. So it's just important that we understand the data within our system, our school district, those who are attending our school versus those who live within the boundaries of our school system.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I look at this website constantly, or at least every other day. And it's interesting to note that that's one of the questions I kind of had for Nicole, that we're showing, I think, in our school district boundary, just the area is a much higher number than we show in our individual schools. So in other schools, or if people are transferring to go to a school outside of our district, they're having cases there that don't necessarily reflect, like our numbers that you post for each school is much more accurate data, I think, than our zip code. The zip code's saying the entire community. The school district boundary is just saying people who live in our boundary and
Right.
students that attend our schools or some other school. And it seems like a lot of the numbers are attending other schools based on our numbers we're seeing.
Yes, I agree, Kevin. What's interesting about our data, and Nicole and Ted and I had a conversation today just about school transmission. And we were having a conversation about are we seeing school transmission? And I would say for the most part, we are not. And we had the conversation, and Nicole, I don't know if you were able to follow up with the health department about that definition of what that looks like.
No, yeah.
But from our conversation, we may have just one case that is related to school transmission, 0 to 1. We weren't certain because we need to get a bit more clarification from the health department. But that, I think, speaks to the mitigation measures we have in place here in the system. And I don't want us to be fooled as the rates go up in our community. We're going to see some of that, and we are seeing that come into our system. It's the nature of how that works. When we're not a Cedarburg School District, our buildings are not a bubble. Our kids go home, they go and hang out, and they hang out with parents. And you heard it today during part of the presentation that the positive cases in our system are coming in from experiences that they've had outside of our system. So I guess to Brendan's point, the data is, it's good data for us at this time. I'm pleased with the work that we have done to get to this point. But again, I believe that as the community spread increases, we're going to see our numbers begin to tick upwards here in the system.
Yep, it's logical
It is.
conclusion, but I appreciate everybody's doubling down and doing the work that they've been doing thus far to mitigate that as best they can.
So I went ahead and did some calculations just on burden rate within our district, and it ends up to being about 1.6 per thousand, which when you do the math, it works out to be about 5 or 6 is what we have going on in the district. So people use burden rate for all different, different ways, and you have the burden rate for the state, you have burden rate for the community, and some of us superintendents are trying to figuring out what the burden rate is for our school system. So it's important for us just to take all this data into consideration when we're making decisions, and to make certain that we are in the best position to make an informed decision when in fact we may need to do that. Any questions, board members, on any of this data that has been presented?
I would add one just side comment too. The hospitalizations is hard for me to track on that website because it goes up and down. But one thing that's interesting to look at is the death rate. And it's been about 6 weeks now, thank God, in our county since we've had a fatality, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, it's going to continue, and I'm not mitigating. This is a very serious illness. But it's incredible that we've gone 6 weeks without a fatality in Ozark County.
Yeah.
It's a credit to people I think, adapting, taking precautions, wearing masks, doing whatever they can do, washing their hands. So I appreciate that.
And this trend of these positive tests, this is real, it's everywhere. I mean, we are spiking, and so that's even doubly more impressive of how low our numbers are. So truly, thank you for the great work that you've done. It's exceptional, given what's going on everywhere.
I do think it continues to be a call to action in the community to make certain that everybody's doing their part in the community to be safe, because we will be able to withstand this for a bit here in the school system, but we will see some of that, those cases creeping into our system from the community. And I think the more the community can be active in being safe, the greater our likelihood is to continue with our current model.
I think that's really well said and really timely and appropriate for everybody to hear. I don't know how many thousands of people are still watching us on the YouTube live stream, but I just really hope that everybody understands the importance and the role that they all play in keeping our schools open as they are right now. If we disregard what is widely considered to be safe practices and we just kind of toss that into the wind because we don't want to or we can't for some reason, then that's going to be all the quicker that our schools close to virtual. And You know, for those of us who agree that the best type of education happens face-to-face, and I don't think there's anybody that disputes that, that's where we would all love to be. We really have a collective responsibility to help keep ourselves there. And when we toss away numbers for false data or whatever, we're just kind of sealing our own fate in creating that situation that nobody really wanted in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. I think our parents
Yeah.
and the students themselves are our best defense. If they don't feel well, they got a headache, take a day or two off, get a test before you come into school, and then get tested.
Well, and even something as simple as a mask. I mean, just understanding that, you know, we may not feel sick, we may not, but this is our part in acting as a responsible community to help everybody else in that same community, and in a larger community, really, to be quite honest. Stay safe to stay open. I mean, that phrase has been played and played and played and overplayed, but it's the truth. And if we're thinking about this pragmatically, if we ignore all of these things and throw caution to the wind, that ensures our fate so much more quickly than if we do something simple like maintaining a social distance, like keeping a mask on our face. It doesn't seem that hard to connect the dots. I really hope we can collectively connect them.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree. Well said, Sam. We are expecting individuals to change their behavior. You know, we know, and I've done that myself. I have, you know, there are times I've been invited to events and it just doesn't feel right. If it doesn't feel comfortable, I know the risk that's there, and I choose not to go to those. And if I do go to an event, I'm making certain I'm masked up and I'm social distancing and washing my hands. And I think taking that personal responsibility is certainly going to help us as a system stay open as long as possible. And the model that we have right now, I think parents appreciate it. I know students love it. It is certainly, as we've heard, stressful for teachers, especially those teachers who are navigating both environments. I think that is certainly more stressful than those who are dealing just with students who are all in person. But the greater we can concentrate on making and taking steps to stay safe, I think the longer this model will stay in place. And right now, the way it's working is it feels as if it's closing in on us, quite honestly, when you look at our data and you look at the community data. And that's why I absolutely beg of the community to make certain they're doing the right work to stay safe so we can stay open. So board members, what you'll see on our website, I'm going back 2 slides. This slide will be added to our dashboard on our website, as will this side. So you'll have the overall chart, and then you'll have these 2 graphs that will be added. So again, we're building that dashboard so people can go there and see the latest data. This information, board members, is the decision framework that had been provided by the Washington Ozaukee Public Health Department. And I mentioned the word critical, and you can see at the bottom of this chart, there's a purple row there, and it says critical, and that's where you see the greater than 350,000 cases per 100,000. And at this, when you cross that threshold, the health department does recommend that school systems consider virtual. But I will also note that at the bottom of that chart, there's 2 asterisks that say decisions about learning models should not be based solely on this data. And so that's why I think it's imperative that we dig into our district data and we're aware of that data. And we make decisions using a very holistic approach. And so right now, there is not a recommendation to go to virtual. I think we continue to offer in-person, and we continue with our mitigation measures. The next slide you will see is a matrix that came out from the CDC, and it's somewhat similar to what the Washington Ozaukee Public Health Department provided. This matrix was provided to the public, I want to say maybe a week and a half ago. It was well after the school year started. And it, again, provides just some guidance for school systems to make decisions regarding the different models that they may want to enter. I share this with you because it is of value to us, and it is something that we look at as we watch and monitor our data. The next slide, just assessing current practices and models. I think you've probably heard this from all the directors, that there's ongoing continuous improvement in our system, and there are practices that we want to continue to work on and improve upon. And social distancing, it's working well, but that's an area that I think when you have kids, you have to continually remind them about the social distancing. The mask wearing is not quite an issue. Our kids are doing an awesome job complying with that request, but social distancing in our environment when you're within enclosed spaces, it's a challenge, and we continue to remind our kids. Our practices are now changing to a point where we are using other spaces. As you know, we went through a building project, and there's a lot of new spaces available, and we are slowly moving into some of those spaces, again, practicing good safety measures, but there are advantages to using some of those spaces. For example, lunchrooms, at least at the elementary, we weren't using the lunchrooms the first few weeks of school, and now we are strategically attempting to use the lunchrooms, again, making certain that we have social distancing. Kids are masked when they're not eating, and they're washing their hands. So we're slowly moving into spaces that we originally did not intend to use due to the social distancing. Content pacing, you heard that from Alan. I think it is a challenge, and it's a challenge, I think, in all environments, and that's a key piece for us to concentrate on. We want to make certain that we have the right pacing, because there are certain milestones we all have to hit throughout the year. Mask breaks continue. When I'm in my office, I see the high school teachers taking their classes out for mask breaks, and I think that's a key piece, and you heard a little bit about that, that it's good for all kids to get out there and staff just to get the fresh air. And there's research behind just students taking breaks and going out and getting fresh air. So those mask breaks, I think, are actually beneficial, and I can see something like those breaks continuing actually after this is all over, because fresh air is such a valuable part of a student's well-being. And the instructional demand, we'll continue to monitor that. You heard me use the word fatigue. It's a demanding environment right now, and we know that it's demanding in our own personal lives, given the environment that we live in, and is certainly demanding on our staff. And so we continue to be cognizant of what we're asking them to do, and think about ways that we can better support them so they can continue to provide a quality program. Model, I just want to touch on this. Our instructional model, we will continue to look at it and make tweaks. Alan alluded a little bit to this about time allotments. Are there things that we can do differently with the time that's provided, or perhaps we may need more time? Looking at other K-12 systems and colleges, how are they using their time? Some of them have been in this model longer than we have, and so let's learn from them. And that's a good segue into the last piece here, which is the hybrid. I had mentioned before that we are investigating a hybrid, and we are continuing to do that. I'm happy that it's taken us some time, because in speaking with other superintendents, they are seeing advantages and disadvantages to the hybrid. So I'm not anxious to pivot into that, because there are drawbacks to a hybrid, and it's even, some have reported even more challenging on instructional staff than what we see now. One of the advantages of hybrid, if you split a class in half and there's a positive case, you would probably have to quarantine less, and we do see some of that in some of the systems. A hybrid certainly has an impact on parents, because parents are impacted because you have kids that are home, and the curriculum pacing is also a challenge. And those are 4 areas that have been identified as I continue to have conversations with superintendents who are running some type of hybrid. So at this point, it continues to be an area that we're examining and collecting information on. And now, board members, I want to bring your attention to the face covering, the district versus the state mandate. As you know, the state has extended, I shouldn't say the state, the governor has extended the mask mandate to November 21st. And in this particular chart, you can see the district expectations, the state, and then which areas are more restrictive. I won't walk you through this entire chart. You've seen this before. I think the main difference between the orders is that the state's order states that students, everyone within an enclosed environment has to wear a mask unless they are in an unoccupied room. Our order originally stated that you can take your mask off if you are greater than 6 feet away from an individual in the room. So that's a difference. The state order does not go down to K3 or K4. and ours does. And the other change, I believe, we had language in our order regarding a mask on school grounds. If you were within 6 feet of an individual on school grounds, that means outside the building, on the playground, or on a sidewalk, or something like that, you had to wear a mask. The state mandate is silent on outside spaces.
So, Todd, are you looking for us to approve what we've been doing, which is reflected on page 29?
What I was going to bring forward is the motion that was approved on the 29th of July, which is on the screen now. And in speaking with our administration and getting feedback, we brought forward this particular motion, and it is truly the pleasure of the board what they would like to do. The order for the state is in place in November 21st. I think it may be wise for us just to consider this in the event that the state order is challenged and overturned. And if we want to have something in place, it may be worth us reviewing this.
Yeah, I think we probably should vote on it because there's some serious constitutional questions with the order. So I think it's something that it's in the board's prerogative to do. So I think we should do that.
I have just a comment, and are we talking about page 29, not the 729 motion, but the following page?
Correct. So
Yes, the only tweak I have, which is a minor item, but just for clarification's sake, that I think we don't really address lunches here. Of course, we probably should. So I think, especially as the weather gets worse and kids can't go outdoors to have a lunch, that I think we need to state for lunches that individuals may remove masks when eating, however, only when 6 feet of social distancing can be maintained, should be added to this. Because otherwise it doesn't really talk about, it just says you have to have a mask on when you're inside of school, which that won't work at lunchtime, and we know that won't work, so we should just clarify that.
That makes sense, Kevin. I can tell you that during the lunch period, there are times when students cannot maintain 6 feet of social distancing, just so you're aware. And that was something that the board recognizes, that we've always said you couldn't guarantee 6 feet of social distancing. And so at lunch, they could be in their classroom meeting, for example. I think at the high school, they probably have the 6 feet. At the middle school, not quite. And at the elementary, it's probably more between 3 and 6 feet.
So what would you like that to say, Kevin, if you were?
Well, I've observed the high school in photographs, and I was there when they were going well out of their way to make sure everyone was 6 feet away from each other on how they laid out the tables and things like that. And it is, I believe it's maintained at the high school for sure.
So like on the third line, you could just say, when it says, when in an unoccupied room, comma, or eating, comma, is that kind of what you're getting at, Kevin?
Or at lunch.
Or at lunch.
Right. But I would like us to try to maintain social distancing, as Sam mentioned before, I think as much as possible at all of our schools, whether it be, literally students jumping into the hallway to eat, or back to their classroom, or some in the cafeterias, things like that. We should try to maintain that where we can.
But this is more face covering we're talking about than social distancing, right?
But we do talk about masks may be removed when 6 feet of social distancing can be maintained when you're outside of school buildings.
So
inside, we require them inside, and I'm just saying technically we won't when you're eating lunch.
to be clear, so what Dave said, when we go down, when in an occupied room, or
during lunch periods.
During lunch periods.
I think you just say when eating.
When eating?
I think if you take out lunch, they think mask-free for 25 minutes.
Yeah, that's true, when eating, maybe.
Okay, so when eating? Is that what you were saying too, down there, Sam?
Yeah, right. I just think, let's be specific and say maybe or while eating lunch, just while they're actively in the process of eating, just so I think that was Brandon. It's hard to see on a long, straight table, but I think it was Brandon that was saying that, they don't want to see it as a 25-minute mask break.
Right.
Or a snack in the classroom isn't the same as eating lunch.
Right.
So it's probably good.
Yeah, because they do, I think, eat a snack sometimes during their mass break.
So maybe it's best just to say while eating, which would cover both the classroom for snacks
What about drinking? Do they have to wear the mask while they drink? It's hard to
Yes.
do. It's possible.
Well, just kind of take one loop off, take a sip of your water, and then put it back on.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't even need to, I don't know if we need to dig down and just say, or while eating with permission, like during, because some kids will just crack out a pack of Doritos or something and eat even though they don't necessarily have the permission to do so, and there goes the mask. They should have some sort of permission, whether it's a permitted snack or a permitted lunch or something like that. I don't know if we have to be that nuanced in this language, but probably. We'll always have people looking for loopholes.
I think it's clear if we were to say when in an unoccupied room or while eating or drinking, the mask may be removed.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah,
That's clear, concise, everything.
yeah.
Yep.
You
To
got
the
that,
point.
Brenda? So the question is, do
This
they
is
need
just
6
about
feet
the
of
face
social
coverings.
distancing when they're eating and drinking as well?
They don't have 6 feet of social
No.
distancing when they're eating.
No,
No, sometimes it
everywhere.
says maybe 2 feet, 3 feet. So
That's
some
what
are in the, they were in the classrooms, and depending upon the class size, the students are closer together. Elementary schools have moved into the lunchrooms, and they're spaced out, but it's not 6 feet in all, because some of the round tables, it's not 6 feet.
our current practices are working well, and I think what we're trying to capture here is our existing practices to make certain that
Yeah.
we don't deviate from those if the order expires.
Yeah.
Right. I like this language because I think it sends a clear message that until further notice, things stay the same. They are in our district.
Mm-hmm, yep.
So-
So we're trying to clarify that.
When in an unoccupied room, when eating and when drinking. So that's the only addition at this point. Does anyone else have any issues with this or would like to expand on anything?
I'm good.
I think this also keeps our teachers from being mask police. The way that we had it written before was,
What are we doing on, Todd, this is a question for you, just occurred to me, for instruction, is the, so if you have a teacher at the front, head of the class, for example, who's fully distanced, is that person required to wear a mask or what's the deal with that? Can they not?
They are required to wear masks.
Okay.
The only time they would be able to remove a mask if they were just in an unoccupied room.
Got it.
If
Just
they're
like
on
it
their
says.
prep and all the teachers and all the kids are gone, most of them probably have their door closed and their mask off. So I popped in a teacher's classroom today, and she was in there with their mask off at her desk, and I kept my distance, just said hello and closed the door, and I was out.
And Todd, just to clarify, that's more strict than the state guidance, is that right? Wasn't there a carve-out that teachers could remove a mask for instructional period? And we've opted to keep them masked, is that right?
You're right, Brandon, the state order says when you're making an educational presentation, I think is what it said. And,
Is that not, does that not mean teaching?
From my experience, when I'm walking through the system, I have not seen, and I'd have to ask Adam if his teachers are taken out, but I know at the elementary, they're teaching with their masks on.
Yeah, I think that's good practice. I was just clarifying that I think we're being more careful than we
Right.
probably.
I think page 27 talks about the state, and it says that their statement allows them to remove.
Yeah.
A single speaker may remove the face covering when actively speaking while maintaining 6 feet away from all
Right.
individuals.
Yep. So I was just pointing out, we're doing more
We're being more-
safety
Right.
technique
more
with how
strict.
we're doing it.
Right, and it's something we can always adjust as the data and the science develop and the people's, our customers' approach to the virus might change over time here.
sure.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, we can always change it as we get more data.
Do you need a motion on that?
We would.
I will make that motion. You want me to read it all the way through, or can I just reference slide 29 with
With the
the
addition.
modification and addition of "or while eating and drinking" after the unoccupied room sentence, or in the middle of the unoccupied room sentence?
Right.
I'll second that. Kennedy?
A motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I guess I'd just like to add from my own personal perspective that as long as we're operating under the premise that a positive test result is a metric we're going to use to decide whether or not we're closed down, as long as we're in that world and we have to deal with it that way, I think from my perspective, we should keep doing things the way we're doing. It seems to be working, if that's our metric. Whether that's a proper metric or not is another question, but not before us currently.
Sure. I mean, we all want to keep the schools open, and like you said, it seems to be working.
Well, it might not be the best time to make changes.
Right. All right, motion and a second. Any more discussion? All those in favor, roll call. Creer.
Aye.
Padberg.
Aye.
Cox.
Aye.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Goldbeck.
Aye.
Reimers and aye. All right, that is the end of,
Before we go on real quick, just since this is, I think this is an important thing now that we've adopted this language, that I think an important part of this was in the second sentence is that face coverings will be worn by all individuals while transporting students. I've heard a number of people that have gotten in contact with me that have seen parents dropping their kids off at school without any sort of face coverings. I think that this message sort of just needs to be overtly made public to the parents, that they ought to understand their responsibility in this, just so that they understand they're a part by and large.
Well, it's not my understanding that this motion would cover a parent dropping a kid off at school.
While transporting students?
I was thinking it meant busing,
Yeah,
or
me too.
driving to athletics or something like that.
I was too. I was thinking it was bus drivers or coaches if they're taking the tennis team somewhere, you know, in a van or something like that. I didn't think it would go to individual families.
It seems to be to by all individuals when on school grounds, ... while transporting students, which to me includes parents.
The spirit of that was.
And rightly so.
Yeah, the spirit of that was when it was school district provided transportation.
Outside your vehicle,
Yeah.
your family vehicle.
But maybe we need to add that clarification.
Do we need to clarify that?
yeah, I think so.
I'm happy to make another motion clarifying that.
Okay, why don't you do that?
You want that?
Families with their children.
Should I amend the motion or should I make a completely separate one?
Just amend it.
Okay, so I'm going to amend my motion to adopt the face covering language as presented on slide 29 with the clarification that while transporting students means bus transportation or district individuals transporting students, to not include parental transport of students.
I'll second that. Kennedy.
Motion and a second.
Sam, did you think that was a decent clarification? Did I get what you're saying?
Yeah, it's clear what this language would mandate. Yes, that is clear.
Okay.
All right. So we have it amended, and are you clear on everything, Brenda? Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I think that we're omitting a very important group of people that would compromise the integrity of this entire thing that we're trying to do here by requiring the face coverings. I think that parents ought to be included, and that'll change my vote eventually when we vote on this.
Yeah, I don't understand the need for a parent in their own vehicle with their student.
No, not in their own vehicle, but while they're walking their child to the school building, which happens a ton at the elementary level, and I think these are...
No.
Well, I did not understand that's what you were.
Yeah, I don't mean in their car, no, not in their car.
Transporting I took
But
as vehicle.
while physically walking their child to the front door, for example, of an elementary school, I think that those parents ought to have face coverings on.
Yeah, they are required. Face coverings are required to be worn by all individuals when on school grounds, and period. So I think we're on the same page there, Sam.
Okay.
I viewed that you meant in.
I think it says that.
Okay, then I think we're all good. I think we're philosophically aligning here.
Yeah.
But then back to my original point, sort of, I think that might come as a surprise to those parents who may be walking their child from the car to the front door of the school. And I just think that we should be really overt in our messaging, letting them know that part of the responsibility is theirs when they're doing that.
I agree.
Yeah, it's been communicated to me as a elementary school parent.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sam.
And middle, so
We'll continue to do that, Sam.
Okay,
Yep,
great.
absolutely.
all right.
So we're gonna
we
strike
are-
that second motion, right? We're not moving forward with the second motion.
I'm sorry, what?
We're striking that second motion? We're not going forward with that, Brandon's
gonna
motion?
No, the second,
Yeah, we can keep it just to
We
clarify.
can still
it's
do
Oh,
that,
okay.
to talk about
I think we
the
discovered an ambiguity we should fix.
Yeah.
foreign district vehicles.
Vehicle transportation.
Okay,
I'll keep my motion.
Okay,
And Hiram,
got it.
Kevin has a second.
yes.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call, all those in favor, Creer,
Aye.
Padberg,
Aye.
Cox,
Aye.
Kennedy,
Aye.
Goldbeck,
Aye.
Reimers and I. Motion passes unanimously. All right. And then there's only one more motion to do.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Motion and a second. Roll call. Creer.
Don't you want any discussion on this, Mr. President?
Sure. Sure, why
Aye.
not? Padberg,
Aye.
Cox,
Aye.
Kennedy,
Aye.
Goldbeck,
Aye.
Reimers and I. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thanks.